Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all to the 2025 UNPDC Next Generation Workshop. My name is Ludovica Castelli. I'm a project manager working for the Consortium based at IAI in Rome. This workshop has become an integral part of the UNPDC annual conference, and for good reason. It captures something that is essential about this community, which is a commitment not only to collegiality, but also to supporting new voices, new perspectives, and new ways of thinking about the challenges that shape global security. Each year, this event brings together a small group of exceptional early career scholars and practitioners, which are selected through a highly competitive process from across the world. And this year's cohort continues that tradition. You represent an incredible diversity of backgrounds, regions, and disciplines, and the quality of your work is a reminder that the future of this field is in capable hands. The idea behind the Next Generation Workshop is basically that of creating a platform where young professionals can present their idea, test their assumptions, and engage directly with policymakers, EU officials, and members of the consortium. It's meant to be a bridge between research and policy, between generations, and between perspectives that don't often have the chance to speak to one another. So over the next 4 hours, you will explore some of the most relevant issues shaping the non-proliferation and disarmament landscape today. We'll start with a session of regional perspectives on non-proliferation and disarmament, a topic that reminds us that while these are global challenges, their meaning and impact are often defined by local realities. The second session will focus on nuclear proliferation challenges and the future of the NPT regime, a theme that feels particularly urgent today, as we see the global non-proliferation architecture being tested by shifting power dynamics, emerging technologies, and growing regional tensions. And finally, our third session will turn to emerging technologies and arms control, an area that increasingly shapes the future of strategic stability. What makes this workshop special is that it's not just about presenting, it's about engaging. So it's about asking difficult questions, challenging assumptions, and exchanging these ideas in an open way. The discussions that start here often carry into the main conference over the next day and a half, and I encourage you to use this opportunity to connect, to debate, and to learn from one another. In many ways, the Next Generation Workshop is the heart of the UNPDC annual conference and reminds us that progress in this field depends as much on people as it does on policies, on creativity, critical thinking, and collaborations across generations. The Next Generation Workshop is not the only program that the consortium has when it comes to capacity building. We've seen, and there are a lot of people in this room, we've seen the mentorship program yesterday kicking off, coordinated by the Vienna Center, a program that connects early career women with senior experts in the field, helping to build confidence, experience, and networks. There are also UNPDC internships, offering hands-on experience in partner institutions such as IAI, CIPRI, PRIF, IISS, and the Vienna Center. We do also have e-learning courses on non-proliferation, disarmament, and EU policies designed to make expertise more accessible to students and professionals. And through initiatives like the Proliferation Awareness course and the UN Disarmament Fellows visit to Brussels, we're helping also to raise awareness, inspire interest, and build connections between the policy and academic communities. These efforts altogether share the same spirit as today's workshop, a belief that investing in education, mentorship, and dialogue is essential to sustaining and strengthening the global non-proliferation regime. I would also like to take a moment to thank our partners across the consortium, the FRS, PRIF, IISS, CIPRI, and the Vienna Center, for their continued collaboration and commitment to supporting this next generation of experts. A special thanks as well to our chairs, Eva, Rebecca, and Marion, for guiding the discussions today, and to our colleagues, to the European External Action Service for their ongoing commitment to nurturing this next generation of experts. And finally, to all of you, the participants, take the space to share your work, to test your idea, to build relationships that might grow into future collaborations. So once again, welcome, a very warm welcome to all of you. I wish you an aspiring and stimulating morning. And with that, it's my pleasure to open the floor to the first session on regional perspectives on non-proliferation and disarmament. Thank you.
Hello. A beautiful good morning, everyone. My name is Eva Can. I'm currently the technical leader of WIN Global, and I previously worked for the IAEA as an IAEA nuclear safeguards inspector, and I also worked in the United Arab Emirates for the regulator on nuclear as a senior nuclear export control specialist. It's a great pleasure for me to open this morning session and to have all these young nuclear professionals here to listen to our two speakers. We will have Sogol Idris from Iran and Nse Abbasi Ayara from Nigeria, speaking about regional aspects. So the first speaker will be Sogol, who will speak to us about the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, or vulgo the Iran nuclear deal. And without further ado, Sogol, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so pleased and honored to be here today, and I'd also like to thank the organizer for arranging this workshop. So today I'm going to talk about Iran's nuclear program and its legal and political dynamics in 2025. My representation is divided into 4 parts. In the first part, I will talk about historical and political context. In the second part, I will focus on Iran's NPT obligations, compliance, and verification. And then in third part, I will discuss about the scope and significance of Iran's JCP commitments. And the last part, I will look at the enforcement within the non-proliferation regime. So on August 28, 2025, after several calls since 2019 to trigger the snapback mechanism in response to Iran's failure to meet its nuclear-related commitments under the JCPOA following the US decision to leave in May 2018, the E3 countries, which are Germany, France, and the UK, finally decided to activate it. The mechanism took effect on September 27th, reinstating all UN sanctions previously lifted under the JCPOA, endorsed by UN Security Council Resolution 2231. To grasp why this decision matters, it's important to look back at what the JCPOA actually is and what it was meant to achieve. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action is a legally non-binding agreement between Iran, the P5+1, which are the 5 permanent members of UN Security Council plus Germany, and the European Union. It was designed to strictly regulate Iran's nuclear program in exchange for gradual sanctions relief, with the ultimate aim of ensuring that Iran's nuclear activities remain exclusively peaceful. This activation of snapback prompted Iran once again to threaten its withdrawal from the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, an argument it has invoked several times since the US left the JCPOA. However, despite this rhetoric, on September 9th, Iran concluded a new understanding with the International Atomic Energy Agency, known as the Practical Modalities for the Implementation of Safeguard in Iran, signed in Cairo. This arrangement marked the resumption of cooperation between Iran and the IAEA, which had been suspended since July 2, 2025, under a domestic law adopted in response to repeated Israeli attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities and scientific personnel, as well as subsequent US strikes. Nevertheless, Iran later suspended the implementation of this arrangement following the activation of the snapback mechanism. The Iranian case illustrates the major challenging facing the global non-proliferation regime. At times, Iran have even threatened to withdraw from the NPT to deter the E3 from triggering the snapback mechanism. Although this tactic failed, Article 10 of this treaty does legally allow withdrawal. Iran joined the NPT in February 1917 and concluded a comprehensive safeguard agreement with the IAEA in 1974. Its additional protocol, approved in 2003, was implemented voluntarily until 2006 and later applied provisionally under the JCPOA from 2016 until its suspension in 2021. Iran's national doctrine, shaped by Iran-Iraq War, emphasizes the elimination of weapons of mass destruction, strengthening the NPT, and establishing a WMD-free zone in the Middle East, further reinforced by Islamic jurisprudence prohibiting WMD development. Yet, despite these commitments, Iran's nuclear program has raised concerns since 2003. The JCPOA sought to normalize its program under the NPT framework. Today, however, mistrust, bad faith, and regional instability dominate. As a non-nuclear weapon state, Iran undertakes not to acquire nuclear weapons and to accept safeguard on all peaceful nuclear activities to ensure no diversions to weapons. It is important to distinguish between Article 2 and Article 3. These are legally distinct. The IAEA is responsible only for verifying compliance with safeguards, while the assessment of overall compliance with the NPT rests with the state parties. In its recent resolution, the Board of Governors found that Iran's many failures since 2019 to fully cooperate and disclose undeclared nuclear material and activities constituted non-compliance with its safeguards agreement. 4 undeclared sites, inconsistent accounting, withdrawal of inspectors, and non-implementation of Modified Code 3.1 were cited. Regarding the last point, it is worth mentioning that the legal character of the subsidiary arrangement and its Modified Code 3.1 remains debated among legal experts, emphasizing the need for objective legal interpretation and further academic analysis. Building on these unresolved matters, as requested by the Board of Governors in November 2024, the Directors General May 2025 report provided a comprehensive assessment of undeclared nuclear material and activities. It concluded that Iran had failed to declare nuclear material at 3 sites, and due to the lack of credible explanation, the agency cannot confirm the exclusively peaceful nature of its program. Since suspending its additional protocol in 2021, Iran's cooperation has remained limited. At the same time, the IAEA continues in its report to verify the correctness and completeness of Iran's declaration under its safeguard agreements, as it did before the JCPOA, a situation that has sparked debate over the scope of its authority. While some argue that the CSA already allows verification of both declared and undeclared activities, others see the additional protocol as essential for confirming completeness. The lack of broader inspection tools thus highlights the legal and operational challenges of Iran's case within the NPT framework. Besides its obligation under the NPT safeguards, Iran has voluntarily accepted nuclear-related commitments under the JCPOA and verified and monitored by the IAEA. Within the framework of Iran's CSA, the JCPOA implements additional measures deemed necessary to restore confidence in exclusively peaceful nature of its program. These voluntary measures go beyond conventional safeguard obligations and together constitute Iran's commitments under the JCPOA. Under the deal, Iran agreed to limit enrichment to 3.67% and maintain no more than 300 kilograms of low-enriched uranium for 15 years. That said, following the U.S. end of participation in the JCPOA, Iran gradually reduced compliance. As of mid-2025, the IAEA reports that Iran holds over 400 kilograms of uranium enriched up to 60%. Although the NPT allows uranium enrichment for peaceful purposes, this right remains controversial due to the dual-use nature of nuclear technology. Enrichment is considered permissible under Article 4 if conducted under IAEA safeguard in line with Article 3. Still, the production of highly enriched uranium inevitably raises proliferation concerns. As the IAEA Director General noted, Iran is the only non-nuclear weapon state under the NPT to have produced such material, which remains an issue of serious concern. This escalation has sharply reduced Iran's breakout time, originally estimated at 1 year under the JCPOA, and also raises serious questions under Article 2 of the NPT given the proliferation risks. The JCPOA was originally intended to promote regional and international peace and security. UN Security Council Resolution 2231 also emphasized its role in advancing nuclear non-proliferation. The end of the JCPOA or any potential withdrawal from the NPT would seriously weaken the non-proliferation regime. Despite the US exit, the remaining participants continued effort to restore compliance, especially in 2020-2021. Nonetheless, negotiations have since stalled amid the war in Ukraine, rising tensions in the Middle East, Israeli strikes on Iranian sites, and the activation of the snapback mechanism further complicating diplomacy. Even if the JCPOA has not fully met its goals, it remains a landmark in non-proliferation diplomacy and a potential model for future agreements. It shows that states can reach consensus on complex nuclear issues through detailed, non-legally binding arrangements. In time of geopolitical rivalry among major powers, such flexible framework may provide an alternative means to sustain dialogue and reduce proliferation risks. Furthermore, an in-depth study in 2021 found that the JCPOA could serve as a basis for regional initiatives, including a WMD-free zone in the Middle East by promoting transparency and confidence-building measures. While the JCPOA illustrates how complex nuclear issues can be addressed through diplomacy and structured commitments, its implementation has also exposed broader weaknesses in the enforcement mechanism of the non-proliferation regime. While the IAEA can detect and report cases of non-compliance, it cannot impose corrective measure on its own, which highlights the gap between verification and enforcement. Effective enforcement thus relies heavily on political wills of state, which is often difficult to sustain. The regime's effectiveness depends not only on legal treaties, but also on political tools, review conferences, working groups, resolution, and other mechanisms of dialogue and adaptation. Peaceful dispute resolution and diplomacy remains indispensable, since sanctions and legal enforcement alone have proven insufficient, as illustrated by the DPRK case. The JCPOA introduced a snapback mechanism as an innovative attempt to bridge this gap. This allows verification findings to have direct political and legal consequences. Under the JCPOA and UN Security Council Resolution 2231, after exhausting the dispute resolution mechanism, if a participant notifies the Council of significant non-compliance and the Council does not vote within 30 days to maintain the termination of sanctions, all previous sanctions are automatically reinstated. This is what is known as the reverse veto procedure. However, the snapback has deepened division within the Council. Russia and China argue that any attempt by the E3 to trigger the snapback is both procedurally and legally invalid, while the E3 maintained that they acted in accordance with the resolution. Earlier attempts by China and Russia to extend the JCPOA and the resolution were also rejected, highlighting the growing fragmentation among permanent members and the difficulty of collective enforcement. Moreover, the case of Iran highlights the importance of universalizing the additional protocol, a point that continues to be emphasized in NPT review conferences. And as a final note, the credibility of the non-proliferation regime depends on shared commitments, dialogue, and pragmatic diplomacy to maintain its effectiveness. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sogol, for highlighting the importance of the JCPOA and reminding us what it actually was and where we actually stand on the Iran file, which is a very complicated one. And in my eagerness to start this session, I completely forgot to introduce you. So allow me to introduce Sogol retroactively. So Sogol is a research fellow at the Sorbonne Research Institute for International and European Law, IREDIS, and holds a PhD in public international law from Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne University. Her doctoral dissertation, The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action on the Iranian Nuclear Issue in Light of International Law, examines the JCPOA through the lens of international legal frameworks governing non-proliferation. Her research focuses on public international law, arms control law, international security law, and international relations. So thank you again for your presentation, Sogol, and I suggest that we have the questions and answers after each of the speakers, as long as the questions are still in our memory. Before I open the floor for questions, I would just like to say that I have a deep relation to the Iran nuclear file. From my work at the IAEA, I started working on the Iran nuclear file in August 2002, when there were the revelations of the National Council of Iran that Iran had a heavy water plant and uranium enrichment facilities under construction somewhere underground at a place called Natanz, which nobody had an idea where that was. I later on became an IAEA nuclear safeguards inspector, and I was on 50 inspections in Iran in my lifetime. I spent a lot of time in all declared nuclear facilities and also implementing the additional protocol in some of the other places which are not nuclear facilities. I was there when just the day before implementation day, so I was also in charge for 2 years of coordinating the work of IAEA nuclear safeguards inspectors during all the preparatory work for implementation day. So thousands of centrifuges had to be dismantled and stored somewhere. Enriched uranium had to be downblended and exported. Most of it went to Russia. We had to install cameras in uranium mills, which has never been done before. So all these things, and I remember I was in Iran at one of the mills installing cameras, and then everybody said, okay, we are ready, and the next day was implementation day on the 16th of January of 2016. So I don't know, has any one of you ever read the JCPOA, actually read the text? Okay. I brought my working copy, which was published by the IAEA as an information circular just 3 days after the signature. And if you look at this document, you can see it's full of single pages because different teams were working on putting all this together, and then there's no table of contents. It's very confusing if you don't know what it is all about. It's really a very complicated issue. But in general, I think the JCPOA was a great document. It had great measures. I would call it an AP+, because it also addressed weaponization in Section T. It had this procurement working group to take care of exports and imports, and many other things. So for me personally, it's a pain in my heart that this whole thing fell apart, and we are now in a situation where we don't know where the whole file is going to go. Okay, sorry, that was my personal statement. So Sogol, a question to you from me. What does the Iranian case reveal about the main weaknesses of the current non-proliferation regime, in your opinion? Work?
Yeah, okay. I think that the JCPOA showed that even a very complicated verification system cannot work if there is no political will. So everything depends on political wills of states to implement the whole non-proliferation regime. I think it's very, the most weaknesses, it's about the enforcement. Yeah, there were lots of voluntary measures, but when US ended its participation from the JCPOA, so everything just got changed, and Iran didn't comply to its obligation. And just, I think the most important thing, and also its withdrawal, it's also always a possibility for Iran. Other weaknesses of non-proliferation regime. And yeah, I think the most whole thing is about the enforcement regime, that it depends on political wills. So we have always have a sustained diplomacy, to always have negotiations, and that's the most important thing in the future non-proliferation regime, because nowadays it's very complicated with with US, China. There is a competition, arms race between great power. So maybe today it's very complicated to conclude traditional treaties as before. And so nowadays we have to focus on maybe legally non-binding arrangements, even though JCPOA just collapsed, but it still, as I said, the landmark, I think, and a non-proliferation regime, and has lots of lessons in this field.
Thank you, Sogol. I fully agree with you. Enforcement and also the geopolitics really have a big influence on this.
It very depends on geopolitical environment as a whole.
Yes. Let me open the floor for questions from the audience, and I can see Laura's hand raised. I'm sure you want to say something about modified code 3.1 amongst others.
I do. Laura Rockwood, I was for 28 years the legal officer for the Department of Safeguards, worked closely on the Iran stuff, and equally heartbroken when the JCPOA fell apart. Great presentation, particularly coming from someone who knows the region. Two things that I wanted to touch on that were in your presentation. The issue of correctness and completeness was resolved back in the early 1990s, before I ever produced the first draft of the additional protocol. You find in 1992, there was a resolution on special inspections by the board. In 1992, both the board and the General Conference required correctness and completeness for South Africa. Again, additional protocol came years later. It is a voluntary measure. States are not obliged to conclude it. Damn it. But then the second thing has to do with Code 3.1. Finally, in 2003, 4, something like that, Iran agreed to the modified Code 3.1, which requires them to give information on new nuclear facilities as soon as they've decided to construct them. They agreed to it, and in fact, it was the vice president and head of AEOI, Agazadeh, who signed the note verbal. So he had the authority and the appearance of authority. They bound themselves. Article 39 of the Safeguards Agreement says they can only be modified by agreement between the two parties, and that was never done. And if you go back and you look at the letter that was sent by the Iranian government, you can see they were hedging it. The issue wasn't really whether it had been ratified by the Majlis. It was basically, no, we don't want to do it anymore. So there's really no legal ambiguity about that, and no real legal ambiguity about correctness and completeness, although there are certain factions that like to pretend they are. But terrific presentation, and sorry for that long response.
Thank you very much, Laura. Yes, I think the correctness, completeness, I think the IAEA has the right, but the tools were just lacking, and that's why the AP was developed. Yeah.
I'm so pleased and read your works and I really appreciate it. And I realized that it's a very big debate between you and Professor Joyner about the correctness of modified code. So I know it's a legal debate. I just wanted to show that there is legal debate over. I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah, it works. Yeah, I just wanted to mention in my presentation that I know that there is some, debates over its correctness and completeness and about code modified tree, just a legal debate.
It's Dan Joyner, he's the only one.
Okay. There's also Pierre-Emmanuel Dupont, I think, in France, who also had some analysis about this question. But I think it is a very interesting subject. And we can analyze, we can have more articles about it, about this question, and also the modified code 3.1. I think these two questions are very important and should be more clear. And maybe for you, everything is clear, but I think it deserves to have still have more analysis about these 2 points, which are very important, I think. Thank you so much for your.
Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. There was a gentleman at the back.
Yes. Yeah. Good morning. Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. 2 quick points. My name is Ayman Khalil. I come from Jordan. You've mentioned that the main problem facing JCPOA was the non-compliance. Are you referring to Iran's non-compliance? Or are you referring to US non-compliance? Because 3 years before, 1 year after or at least 2 years after the entry into force, the United States withdrew unilaterally.
Yeah, of course, first of all, it was US.
Yes.
And then after 1 year, I think Iran just started its non-compliance gradually,
right.
Step-by-step measures.
Right, but so that's good. Good to know. But of course, when one party basically leaves the treaty becomes
it's not a treaty.
Inapplicable. Well, the understanding. Second point was you mentioned that JCPOA would be a very good model in establishing WMD-free zones. Could you elaborate on how? And lastly, Madam Chair, with your profound experience in the IAEA, how much resources being used by the agency totally devoted to the case of Iran? I'm talking about human resources plus financial assets. Thank you.
So about the middle because I said that JCPOA can serve as a basis for regional initiatives, included the WMD free zone in the Middle East. It is because I read a very in-depth article about this question, which is very interesting, and it explains how it can contribute to WMD free zone in the Middle East. So, for example, in the JCPOA, we have a dispute resolution mechanism, and so it's a whole procedure with joint commission of 35 days, I think. So the authors, for example, they suggested that this mechanism can be inspired from this mechanism to have a same dispute resolution mechanism. Or we have also parts about the cooperation in nuclear technology in the JCPOA, and the authors, they also suggested that it can also be very useful as confidence-building measures. And there is a very whole study about this question, very interesting and very in-depth. So I can show you after the conference the reference so you can have more detail about this subject. Thank you.
Regarding the IAEA's resources, just from my own perspective, when I started as a safeguards inspector, my section was SGOB2, responsible for Africa and the Middle East. And as the Iran file became more and more prominent, the section was reduced first to the Middle East, then only to Iran. It was the Iran task force. And then after implementation, it became Safeguards Verification Office in Iran. And before the JCPOA was implemented, there was the JPOA, which was the precursor starting from 2013, where Iran, amongst others, permitted the IAEA to have daily access to the enrichment facilities. So we were there every day doing certain verification activities. So obviously a lot of resources were required. Also in the absence of an additional protocol with a state enriching up to 20% U-235, the agency had to become creative how to monitor this type of nuclear program without the tools of the additional protocol. And obviously the agency had lots of inspectors in Iran from different subject areas, some of them who were then whose designations were withdrawn. And I don't know the exact numbers of the inspection effort, but it was the largest inspection effort on Iran. So, Jenny, you wanted to ask something?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jenny Grummel, and I just retired from 38 years in the State Department. And it was my Office of Policy Coordination that was the lead on the JCPOA for many years. I am so impressed. I have seen many, many slides, and I really have never seen any so comprehensive and clear. And I am terribly worried at the entire State Department, Department of Energy, Department of Defense, National Security Council, that no longer has even one soul focused on this, knowing this, having a history with JCPOA. So my effort at the moment, having just retired, is to preserve the documents. You too, it's just extraordinary to listen to you and to hear the details. Where are your papers? The benefit of UN documents is you can hang on to them. They're part of the public record. Please preserve this, because all of you, it pains me too to hear you talk about the JCPOA in past tense. When Witkoff goes off and he's speaking about India, Pakistan, Ukraine, Russia, and the bombings are happening in Iran, not one of us were with him. Nobody knew who was with him. No, there was no one home to answer to, even to ask questions or to send expertise. So please, all of you, study this, take our places, wait until the time comes. It's just an appeal on the first day. Thank you for coming. And your expertise, please don't stop talking about this, especially with your background. So I'm sorry, I won't put you on the spot on questions. We know each other from Middle East peace process. Thank you for being bold and so perfect as a spokesperson for all of us. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jenny. I think we have time for one or two more questions. Please, can you just briefly introduce yourself? Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Veronique Christori from the International Committee of the Red Cross. And thank you very much for your presentation, because it was really excellent. I just wanted to mention that I was at the Security Council the day of the withdrawal of the US from the JCPOA, and in the room you felt the tension, and something big was happening, and it was this failure. It was felt that from everybody in the room. I have a question. I always wonder what the other states could have done better or differently to pressure the US not withdrawing from the JCPOA. Because we are always, I mean, it's not from the ICRC perspective, but the discussion was always about Iran, but I really wonder what the European but other states could have done to pressure a little bit the US?
So it's a very political question. As I said, everything depends on how negotiations evolve. Right now, it's a very complicated situation because China and Russia, they think differently from US and the E3. So they think that resolution is terminated, so there is no more sanctions, snapback is procedurally and legally invalid, and the E3 and US, they don't share this opinion. So how can we just, gather all of the permanent members together to enforce, to have a collective enforcement? It's a very big issue right now, especially with the tensions in the Middle East. US strikes on Iran. If Iran will cooperate, if there will be still sanctions, we are just in a situation before the JCPOA, and it's even worse. So we have sanctions, non-compliance, no additional, nothing. And I think the most important thing is that the permanent member, they override their political interest to help the IAEA, that the agency can rebuild again its enforcement measures, continue its cooperation with Iran, and rebuild, if it's possible, the voluntary measures, confidence building, because right now it's just mistrust between the agency, Iran, permanent members. It's very complicated to gather all together, So I really don't have maybe a clear answer to your questions, but it really depends. We should see how it goes. Thank you.
Thank you, Sogol. And even if the JCPOA is gone for now, we still have the Iran's obligations under its comprehensive safeguards agreements. And I'm very curious to read the next board report because all that HEU is unaccounted for. And I don't know how much other material, not HEU, but all that material that is buried under rubble. So this is a situation for the IAEA which it has never been in before. So let's see where this will go to. In interest of time, I would like us to give a big applause to Sogol. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your extraordinary experience and also your perspective from your home country. Thank you for that. So let's move to our second speaker. This is Mr. Nse Abasi Ayara from Nigeria. He is the Non-Proliferation and Disarmament lead of an organization called Nuclear Aware Africa. This is a non-profit organization dedicated to awareness creation on the peaceful applications of nuclear energy for Africa's sustainable development. Nse has a PhD in environmental resource planning. He is also a certified nuclear security specialized professional and a certified nuclear security fundamentals professional with the World Institute for Nuclear Security WINS, where he has been a member since 2018. Previously, he was a nuclear scholar with the UK's Nuclear Security Culture Programme, administered by King's College London from 2021 to 22. He is also a member of the Institute for Nuclear Materials Management, the INMM, and he is currently undergoing the Leaders for Nuclear program with the International Youth Nuclear Congress, the IYNC. So Nse today will talk to us about the role of civil society, which he's representing for, on the one hand, promoting denuclearization in Africa and also for introducing the peaceful uses of nuclear power applications across the African continent. and say the floor is yours.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I want to thank the previous speaker for her excellent presentation, and to also thank the organizers of this event. So I'll be speaking on the role of civil society in promoting decolonialization in Africa, and I'd start by saying that the civil society is the third sector of society, including government and business. And it's interesting that civil society now has, in Africa particularly, increasing role in promoting denuclearization in Africa. So since the last remnant of South Africa's nuclear weapons program was dismantled, Africa's focus has moved from being centered on nuclear weapons, proliferation, and being focused fully on efforts to counter proliferation or to prevent proliferation. And this is epitomized with the nuclear weapons-free zone, which Africa now has. That is the Treaty of Pelindaba, which was formalized, was signed in 1996 and entered into force in 2009. And the Pelindaba Treaty in many ways represents Africa's ultimate commitment to non-proliferation, with AFCON, the African Commission on Nuclear Energy, managing the verification mechanism. Africa also is committed to a number of other normative frameworks, such as the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, as well as the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and such other normative frameworks which the African Union has put together, such as silencing the gun, although that is focused more on conventional weapons other than nuclear weapons. So the CSOs has long been recognized, their role has long been recognized even by the UN Security Council, such as Resolution 2325, Resolution 1977, all even connected to Resolution 1540, which in various areas talked about encouraging the first committee, for instance, to leverage on civil society for implementation of the resolution, as well as recognizing the role that civil society can play in awareness creation, especially with the public, as well as the connection with policy. So CSOs have long been a critical arm in promoting arms control, ensuring that non-proliferation efforts across Africa are implemented. Hence, they are indispensable partners in sustaining decolonization as well as disarmament efforts. But there are some challenges which I'm going to highlight in the course of the presentation. Hence, this presentation will take 4 parts. We'll look at the nuclear energy advocacy landscape in Africa. We'll also look at the role of nuclear energy CSOs in promoting nuclearization, denuclearization in Africa, as well as the challenges, and I will conclude with a few recommendations. So this table makes an attempt to map the CSOs landscape in nuclear energy advocacy in Africa. Now, this is just a sample. There are others, but these are the major ones. And what we try to look at this in the course of the paper is to see that most CSOs start out as promoting peaceful applications of nuclear, power applications and also non-power applications, but also some delve into promoting denuclearization in terms of arms control and non-proliferation. And in the mix here, we have from both youth networks, such as the African number 6 there, which is the African Young Generation in Nuclear, which is affiliated to the IYNC, right? We also have regional professional bodies coming together, such as number 4, the East African Association for Radiation Protection. all the way to Women in Nuclear, which is affiliated to Women in Nuclear Global and their various countries of origin. So what we see as the energy the landscape in Africa is that we see these organizations coming out, starting mostly as advocacy groups for peaceful applications of nuclear, educating the public and also holding governments accountable, but also delving into the aspects of promoting denuclearization and non-proliferation in the African continent. And this is key because we'll get to see that there's apart from the African Center number 7, Africa Center for Science and International Security, which is more like a research think tank. Every other nuclear CSO is either independent, such as Nuclear Aware Africa, which does not have an international affiliation, and then to other CSOs who have linkages with the regional movements, such as youth networks like the Young Generation in Nuclear. So we could surmise the 3 roles that these CSOs play into 3, including policy advocacy and compliance oversight, public education and awareness creation, and as well as also advancing the peaceful applications of nuclear energy on the continent. So we look at the policy advocacy aspect of it. We can see that CSOs have tried to come together to promote universal ratification of international norms. Already the Pelindaba Treaty, a number of, except one African state has not yet signed up to that, which is South Sudan. So there are efforts to coalesce efforts by all of these organizations to hold governments accountable, to encourage the remaining African states who have not signed up to the Treaty of Non-Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, as well as the NPT, as well as to ensure that these norms are codified in national legislations, and this involves conversation with policy. In the aspect of transparency and accountability monitoring, working alongside international bodies also to gather information independently of government and to ensure that they are reported, the compliance of various African governments or African states are being monitored and reported. And then also promoting dialogue, such as offering technical expertise, as well as legal analysis to promote government delegation and ensuring that African states maintain consistent principled stance on international negotiations. In the aspect of awareness creation, public awareness, CSOs are also putting together various platforms to educate the public on Africa's role in the process of putting together or being part of international treaty negotiations in terms of non-proliferation and disarmament. So there's also a move to include youth engagements, targeted youth engagements and youth networks to instill a long-lasting commitment to nuclear weapons-free zone status, thereby safeguarding the policy commitment of future generations. Also, that of fostering the disarmament culture, building a regional political culture that fundamentally rejects weapons of mass destruction. The third role is advancing peaceful uses of nuclear energy. So like I said in the outset, most of the CSOs in Africa, first of all, start with that of advancing public awareness on the peaceful applications of nuclear. But because there are proliferation concerns, especially with the low public acceptance and awareness of nuclear energy, owing to the incidents that has occurred in terms of Fukushima and the likes. So nuclear energy CSOs now focus on, first of all, countering these negative mindsets in the public, but also adding on top of that the issue of highlighting efforts that the international community first is putting together to ensure that nuclear weapons do not, or materials do not get into the wrong hands, but also while encouraging that peaceful applications of nuclear is also a thing. I'll just move quickly to some of the challenges that CSOs on the continent face. We have that of technical capacity. it's for there are lots of complexities around nuclear law, safeguards, and the likes, and this expertise is not readily available for nuclear for the CSOs. So what this also hampers their efforts in being able to contribute to discussions. I want to dwell a little bit on political access. Issues around nuclear, first of all, is a government issue. And most of times it is being put behind a wall of national security. CSOs do not readily have that access or sit on the table when these matters are being discussed. And that limits their voices, and that also does not give credibility to the process. So that issue of political access is a challenge across the continent. Of course, that issue of funding of CSOs. Apart from the CSOs who have international affiliations, such as the young generation networks across Africa, or rather, women in nuclear, which may have some kind of funding. Independent CSOs have challenges accessing funding. This inhibits their work and also in being able to be involved in the process of promoting denuclearization in Africa. And lastly, among other challenges, exclusion from international discussions on arms control. And one of the areas where that is clear is that in the areas of not being able to have visas to attend these international events. Myself and a few of others had some of those challenges, and this is already becoming an area of research where a few bodies, Daniel and a few other people are coming together to document this exclusion, something that has been called discrimination, especially from people from the global south to participate in international discussions, to lend their voices, especially like during RevCon meetings, you know. So that has become a challenge for African CSOs. And for the diplomats and governments, they would get the seat at the table. But for CSOs who do not have government connections or government affiliations or government backing, being able to independently apply and attend some of these discussions in the international space also has its own issues. So these are some of the challenges that CSOs in Africa tend to have. And for the interest of time, I'll just dwell on that of political access. CSOs are already beginning to bring a seat, have a seat on the table and getting to discuss with government. And one area where that can be dealt with is having formalized maybe MOUs with national government authorities such that they have a seat on the table during discussions, and that will help. Or, you know, AFCON is also the regional body here. AFCON is also trying to bring together CSOs with some of their networks, and that will help CSOs to be able to have a seat on the table, have access to government materials and funding to be able to dispense of their activities in a way that is that will help to promote denuclearization in Africa. So to conclude, CSOs are not just peripheral observers in the process, but they can also be leveraged on to increase public awareness, responsible, and to advance the peaceful adoption of nuclear in Africa. And empowering African CSOs will go a long way to help CSOs to be able to contribute to ensure that Africa's place as a global leader in nuclear non-proliferation is cemented. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Nsef, for highlighting the important work of civil society organizations, which maybe some of us are not aware of, and also for some of the challenges you encountered, including the visa issue. I didn't know until 2 days ago whether this Nsef would be able to come or not. So thank you for all the support that went out to him to get the visa in the first place. So we talk of Africa. Africa has 54 countries, and they are quite diverse, actually. And we have a few people from the African continent here. And could you please raise your hands? So we have Ghana, Madagascar, Nigeria represented here. And which of those countries wants to introduce nuclear power? Which of the countries whom you are representing plans to introduce nuclear power? I know about Nigeria, I know about Ghana, I'm not sure about Madagascar. So I think a lot is going on the African continent. Africa is very resource rich, and Africa also needs to establish their regional infrastructure, not just to be an exporter of raw materials, but also to benefit from those raw materials. There's one initiative I want to make you aware of, which is this initiative where I'm an instructor. It's an AFCON course called Uplifting Nuclear Safeguards in Africa, which is sponsored by the EU and implemented by STUK from Finland. And they run regular courses on safeguards in some African countries. And there will be one in Morocco in March next year. So anyway, this is the background about Africa, and I want to open the floor for any questions. Do you have any questions to Nse? If not, I will start off with my first one. Laura, sorry, please go ahead.
Can't resist a microphone. That was terrific, Nse. And that slide, I took a picture of all of the civil society organizations. I had no idea it was so extensive. And I really support the effort of AFCON, shoring it up and making it a really important regional institution, maybe even like Euratom at some point. I wanted to share with you an experience that Chile observed before they became party to the NPT. They did a children's drawing contest of kids in grade school. And they said, what do you think of, what do you draw, what do you imagine when you think of nuclear? And of course, the first round was dead people, mushroom clouds, blah, blah, blah. They had training courses, you don't call them that at that age, but they gave them educational courses on what nuclear can be, the importance of cancer treatment, et cetera. And they redid the contest a year or two later, and it was night and day. They really had pictures of, people being healed and green grass and trees. So I think educating children from the really early ages can help. I think that the lack of experience with radiation and nuclear is what leads to that fear of this could happen to us, Chernobyl could happen to us, or Fukushima, but good luck. Jenny?
Jenny, please go ahead.
I'd just like to second that. My portfolio for many years was nuclear weapons-free zones, so I appreciate all of the work. I have noticed in the last 3 or 4 years a huge focus now on Africa. I'm friends with Lars van Dassen, who is the executive director of the World Institute of Nuclear Security. There's a board meeting today. He has just spent the entire summer in Africa. You clearly know him. We've
engaged in a number of fora. I think back in May he brought together some CSOs in Nigeria, but also in Senegal and other West African countries to talk nuclear security.
When I was at the NPT meetings and we would have bilaterals, Ghana would always speak up and explain the benefits of nuclear peaceful uses. And I hope you can feel it. I'm with Laura. I took a picture and I took notes on all of the groups that are now involved. And I hope you feel it now that we really are engaged and we really care as the United States and as a community in how things are progressing. Jean Dupré and I are good friends, and I work with the Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, and we've had visiting fellows from Nigeria and Kenya and interesting countries, and you can't imagine what a difference one person could make. When Afghane was having their own political problems, everybody was pitching and helping. Jacek Bilic at the IAEA, we've talked about doing the equivalent of the Mexican disarmament policy course to do it in Africa with AFCON. Namibia is interested in an arms control and disarmament agency. Ours was disbanded in the US in '99. There's the hope that you think of in Africa, I feel is really coming true and coming alive, and the resources are coming. So what a fantastic representative you are, and I hope other people feel it too. You're not forgotten. You're the cutting edge now on science and possibilities. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Very much for your comments, Jenny. Beautiful as always. Ettore, please.
Thanks, Ettore Greco, Institute of International Affairs in Rome. Many thanks for your outstanding presentation. I have two questions that are perhaps more political in nature. One relates to the role of the African Union. You mentioned this role a couple of times. So what's your overall assessment of the actual possibility of the African Union becoming an active proponent of cooperation at the regional level to ensure that non-proliferation continues and can be reinforced in the continent? And what type of political obstacles you see remain, prevent the African Union to consolidate in this regard? And second, you said that there is, of course, considerable support for the nuclear ban treaty in Africa. At the same time, you argue in favor of closer cooperation with UN Atomic Agency and cooperation also with the civil society organizations. So all your suggestion goes into the direction to reinforce the current non-proliferation regime and to make sure that the African states remain committed to respecting the non-proliferation treaty rules. You think these two avenues can continue to be compatible in the sense that you see some African states become more confrontational and more vocal in contesting the current NPT regime?
Thank you for your question, Ettore. I'll start with the first. The EU is in my opinion, quite committed in terms of issues of non-proliferation. That is why we see that there's a lot of support now going into AFCON as being that body that will drive the process. The issue of denuclearization or non-proliferation is front and center. If we look at the EU 2063 agenda, it plays a role in being able to promote peace and security on the continent. But we cannot divorce the activities in the continent from the international community. So that is why I believe that the EU is committed in terms of being able to ensure that Africa's voice is being brought to the table in terms of these conversations. And to the other question you asked about, what was that again? The question?
One of the priorities should be for the African countries to continue to respect the NPT regime if there is a growing confrontational attitude from African states.
I wouldn't say confrontational, right? Because the African states are already beginning to make their voice heard in terms of calling for, because of the growing interest for nuclear in Africa, you have Rwanda and Namibia that was. So there are those conversations about being able to speak to the international community in terms of not in a confrontational manner, but in an organized manner where it's not individual countries speaking, but as a regional bloc, being able to speak and to make the voice heard. I think there's so much weight comes in through that axis instead of as individual countries being able to become confrontational in being able to promote these voices. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we are reaching the end of our allocated time. So I would like all of you to give a big applause to our two speakers. Thank you very much for this interesting session.
Welcome back, everybody. So welcome to the next panel on nuclear proliferation challenges and the future of the NPT regime. So another light topic for this morning. I think it's we can all agree it's a very timely subject, especially as we approach the upcoming review conference of the NPT, which will be taking place in New York this spring. It's doing so, of course, in an environment of rising geopolitical tensions, including among the large military powers and nuclear weapon states. We're seeing, continued rise in global military expenditure worldwide, especially here in Europe, but also in other regions of the world. And is this microphone still working? Yes, somewhat. Including, money spent on nuclear modernization by the nuclear weapon states. And against that backdrop, also I think one of the main trends in recent years has been growing divisions between nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states, notably when it comes to lack of progress on disarmament commitments under the NPT. And regional proliferation drivers, we already got a little bit into that this morning. A lot of ongoing conflicts with also nuclear undertones and rhetoric, and of course in the NPT context, several review conferences that have now taken place without an agreed outcome. So the circumstances are difficult, but really delighted that we have three fantastic panelists and young researchers here today to unpack some of this with us together. And I will introduce them momentarily. So all of them have a slightly different perspective on the issue, but I think kind of a common thread is really what motivates also decision-making by states. What are some of the trends nationally, regionally that might be factors in the future trajectory and the future development of the nuclear non-proliferation regime, as well as what might be some of the implications for the upcoming review conference and other milestones lying ahead. So what we're going to do a little bit differently from this morning, because we've got three speakers and we've got limited time, I'm going to introduce them first, and then I'm going to give them each the floor for 10 minutes. They will, I think they all brought some slides, so we will hear from them collectively, and then we'll turn to the audience. And I want to challenge especially our next generation participants and young mentees in the room to think about some questions. And I look forward to calling on you in the Q&A to hear your perspectives and reactions to what they have to say. So let me go through quick introductions. So to my right, we have Agata Bidas. She's a university assistant and PhD student at the Department of the Theory and Future of Law at the University of Innsbruck. Newly arrived, as she says, so still unpacking her bags, but flown out to Brussels to be with us today. She's a law graduate from the University of Warsaw, and she also holds a master's degree in international development from the University of Vienna, which is where I'm based. Her research experience spans international and European legal norms, legal philosophy, and environmental law, with a critical focus on security issues. And she has a particular interest in the legal and ethical structures surrounding global challenges, including nuclear weapons and disarmament, which is one of the things she will be talking to us about here today. To my left, we have Arthur Franz. He's a research assistant at the Department of Peace and Conflict Research at Uppsala University, working on the research project Opting Out, explaining the effectiveness of election boycotts. So a slightly different topic, but one that's also very, very relevant in today's environment. He holds a Master's of Social Sciences in Peace and Conflict Studies from same university, Uppsala, and a bachelor's degree in International Relations cum laude from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. Did I pronounce that okay? All right. And he's also a proud member of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization Youth Group, which is a youth group that our office also collaborates with closely. It's 2025 cohort, so quite recently. And he is a research fellow there as well, and former director of communications and current research fellow at the South American Institute on Politics and Strategy. So welcome, Artur. And last but not least, Trine Pistrup. How's that? That good? Okay. Okay. Oh no, okay. So tell me how to say it properly. Okay, we'll keep it that way. It's very, very flexible of you. I appreciate that. She's a PhD fellow at the Danish Institute for International Studies, where she researches conceptions of peace and security, with a particular focus on armament and disarmament. And she has previous experience with my own office, the UN Office of Disarmament Affairs in New York, as well as with our friends at the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, so very much part of our little family of disarmament and non-proliferation researchers and experts. So welcome to all three of them. As I said, they're all coming to this issue from slightly different perspectives, and I want to start with Agata. Her research is really focused on the EU and policymaking at the EU level when it comes to nuclear deterrence. And so I thought, since we're in Brussels and this is an EU conference, we would start with her presentation. So over to you, Agata.
Thank you very much for the floor and for this opportunity to be here. It's really great for me to be able to present my ideas and hopefully get some feedback for my research and how to develop it further. So I will be talking today about deterrence, nuclear deterrence from the international law perspective, and also to have this European Union aspect. Let me check if it's working. No. How can I change my slides? Maybe. Yeah. Okay. Maybe my paper blocked it. Okay, so my starting point, actually I had two starting points. The first one was the current international situation around nuclear weapons and nuclear deterrence discussion. So I believe now we have two contradicting trends. The first one is that the numbers of nuclear warheads and the rhetoric around nuclear weapons is rising again. Since we had the peak of the number of nuclear warheads in the 80s. Since then, it was gradually declining because of the arms control treaties. And now this trend is slowly reversing again after some reductions and having the arms control treaties, like for example New START, between the United States and Russia before with Soviet Union. Now we can see that even that first of all, the New START is expiring. Also, some states like China are also rising their numbers. Even states like United Kingdom and France that before were planning to gradually decrease the numbers of nuclear weapons, this is rising again. They reverse some of these policies. And then we have, of course, more tensions between nuclear powers, mostly the US and Russia, but also the discussion of China, it's also important here. And then I just added recently because of this discussion around Donald Trump, who mentioned the idea of resumption of nuclear tests again. And then we have the completely contradictory trend, which is the adoption of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in 2017, which introduced new aspect to the discussion. First of all, it's about raising awareness of humanitarian and environmental consequences of nuclear weapons. The treaty came into force in 2021. Now it's currently having around 70 state parties, and also it's the question if this is the success of the treaty, or still these numbers are a bit disappointing for current state parties. And then my question was, what is actually the role of the European Union? European Union is an international organization. It's not a part to any of these treaties, but in its policies, it has this idea of promoting disarmament and peace and security. So starting from this, I had my main research question, is actually nuclear deterrence legally compatible with European Union's obligation under international disarmament law, which is a huge question having different aspects of it. So I would like to present you some ideas that I gathered so far, and also I have some potential sub-questions for the future. I will be glad to receive some feedback or guidance to how to tackle this issue. So I would start the international legal framework. So we have main, of course, treaties that I already mentioned. We have, of course, Non-Proliferation Treaty. We have the TPNW, but also we have ICJ advisory opinion from 1996 that the International Court of Justice in this advisory opinion claimed that they found that threat of use of nuclear weapons is generally contradictory to the international humanitarian law. However, threat of use of nuclear weapons was not fully said to be fully illegal. So International Court of Justice gave this possibility that in some exceptional situation, extreme self-defense, how was said, but it was not also defined by the court, that it is possible. So this advisory opinion was disappointing for many supporters of disarmament, that it's actually that the court didn't want to give final condemnation of the nuclear weapons. And in this context, we have also another interesting decision of the Court of Justice, not on the slide, from the Marshall Islands case brought by Marshall Islands in 2014, when the question was if the states under Article 4 of the NPT, if they are fulfilling the disarmament obligation, and the court rejected the case on the formal ground, saying that it was dispute. So we have this international framework that it's a bit ambiguous, and for example, International Court of Justice, it's not willing to give the final answer to this. And there the question, if maybe the TPNW gave some rise to possibility to make nuclear weapons actually illegal under customary norm, if this is a possibility to crystallization of the new customary international norm. So at this point, the answer is rather no. So for now, we have the nuclear weapon states that clearly reject TPNW and reject the issue that the nuclear deterrence is illegal. And here I brought one example of a nuclear weapon state stance on the TPNW, including, for example, France, which is the EU member state, saying that actually nuclear deterrence is bringing peace and security for the world. Which was very much being criticized by the TPNW member state parties, and raises this question: who benefits from this current nuclear deterrence? It's only nuclear powers, and why it's not? Why this situation does not helping the non-nuclear weapon states, because they are endangered by the policies of nuclear weapon states. And then the question is, what is the role of the EU in this? So to skip some slides because of the time constraints. So EU has this document called Strategy Against the Proliferation of Weapons of Mass Destruction, still in 2003, which was a part of the EU effort to strengthen multilateralism and international law and security policy. So EU very much promotes universalization and effective implementation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but also of the Comprehensive Treaty Test Ban, and also International Atomic Energy Agency safeguards. However, this strategy actually explained that proliferation of the weapons of mass destruction is one of the main threats for Europe. When we look at the time frame, we can also see that this was after the Iraq War, and this was the idea to see the threats of the weapons of mass destruction of the main threat for Europe. However, it doesn't provide any position on nuclear deterrence. And then we have two other interesting documents. We have the EU Global Strategy, which also reaffirms the EU commitment to goal of nuclear disarmament and also to adherence and full implementation of the NPT. However, here we can see that proliferation of weapons of mass destruction is not seen as a main threat, but it's seen as the one of many other threats. And then we have the newest strategy, which is called Strategic Compass, which explicitly states that EU security members relies on a credible nuclear deterrence provided by NATO. So we can also see a bit of shift of the focus of the European Union from promoting non-proliferation as one of the main challenges to more stressing that credible nuclear deterrence is important for EU member states. And when we look at the member states of the European Union, we can also see that 23 of them are NATO member states who support, of course, nuclear deterrence. France, of course, is the EU member state who possess nuclear weapons, the only one, but also we have 4 member states who possess US nuclear weapons on their soil. And then we have also 3 TPNW state parties who actively oppose it. So in this situation, we can see that EU is internally divided on the issue of nuclear weapons, and also it as the main ambition of the EU is to promote international peace, security on the international level, and I believe that this divided stance between the EU member states, it's also showing outside that EU sometimes it's not credible because of this conflicted stance, especially towards non-nuclear weapon states who believe that EU is a bit hypocritical, supporting nuclear deterrence by NATO, but on the other hand, condemning other states who are pursuing either nuclear energy or even nuclear weapons. And EU, it's also not didn't support TPNW as a whole. So because of the time, I will finish here, and thank you very much for your attention.
Fantastic, Agata, and I think you were even under time by like 30 seconds, so well done. And thanks for setting the scene, because I think a lot of what you've touched on will also be really relevant as we go through the next day and a half here in the wider conference. And of course, this issue of nuclear deterrence, the nuclear umbrella in Europe is a big topic, has been a big topic in this review cycle, in particular of the NPT. So I think you've really touched on a really important issue. So hold your thoughts and questions for Agata as we go to Artur next. And Artur will help us, I think, lift a little bit beyond the European context, look a little bit more globally at nuclear policy making and decision making and what factors come into play when states take decisions on arms control. So over to you, Artur.
Can you hear me well? Yes. So good morning, everyone. And first of all, I'd like to thank the EU and PDC for the invitation. And in doing so, I'd also like to greet the organizers as well as my fellow speakers and our chair. My name is Artur Frens. I'm a research assistant at the Department of Peace and Conflict Research at Uppsala University in Sweden. And I'll present my work titled After Yes, Differential Cost Structures and Commitment to Nuclear Arms Control Treaties. And I look forward to hearing your comments and questions. So here's a quick outline of the presentation. It is based on my master's thesis, which is available online in full. And in this presentation, I'll focus more on my theoretical contributions as well as the main empirical findings and what relates to the future of the nuclear regime. The initial motivation for this study was trying to understand the dissonance between states' claimed preferences and their action regarding the nuclear arms control regime. understood here broadly to encompass arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament. In other words, why would states talk the talk but not walk the walk? This is often attributed to political will, which of course plays a big role here. But what intrigued me was why there was a will to claim support for arms control but not to act on it. My work contributes to a systematic understanding of this type of behavior by arguing and showing that treaty features interact with countries' nuclear reliance status to create differential cost structures for the act of committing. As previous studies have shown, support for arms control norms is generally high. However, there are significant variations in commitment across both countries and treaties. Treaties banning other WMDs, such as the Chemical and Biological Weapons Conventions, for example, have received near universal commitment, despite some relevant holdouts. Some nuclear treaties, such as the NPT and the CTBT, for example, also have over 90% membership. What then explains the membership pattern of the TPNW? Why have even traditional arms control advocates held out? The treaty has already entered into force, but as we know, it is far from being universal. Also, and crucially, how can NPT and CTBT advocates address their own challenges in terms of universalization or entry into force? This brings me to my research question: under what conditions do institutional design features impact states' commitment to nuclear arms control treaties? Much of my theoretical argument is inspired by Stephen Herzog's work, highlighting the linkage between signaling theory and participation in multilateral nuclear treaties. He argues that participation is a multi-step process wherein every step, be it signature, ratification, or accession, is costly, but in different ways and to different extents for each actor. In line with him, I argue that states move from a status of support, which is communicated through lower cost signals, which I measure through UN voting patterns, to higher cost acts of commitment. This is expected to be true regardless of whether countries do so because of cost-benefit analysis or identification with the norms. However, I argue that this relationship is moderated by state and treaty characteristics which interact to create differential cost structures for commitment. This means that while more supportive states would always be expected to act on their words and commit, they might deviate from that expected path because of their own characteristics, namely whether or not they rely on these weapons for their security, and or because of the specific costs demanded by a given treaty. I test my theory using 3 hypotheses. For this presentation, I'll focus on 2. First, I test whether increased support leads to higher levels of commitment, which might seem intuitive, but remains empirically undertested in this context. And second, I test whether nuclear reliance states are less likely to commit to disarmament and weaponry development control treaties than to non-proliferation ones. These theoretical questions are based on an inductive matching of treaty types and cost structures using both Furon's traditional costly signaling mechanisms as well as QUAC's recent expansion with installment and reducible costs. As for the data, I employed the Alva Myrdal Center Agreement Information Dataset, which was kindly emailed to me by Siri, who's in the audience, before publishing, as well as UN General Assembly voting records. This allowed me to have a coverage that is as close to the real population of cases as possible, encompassing all UN member states from the introduction of the first relevant treaty in '67 until 2024. I have included only multilateral treaties where nuclear arms control is the central aim. Although other treaties also deal with nuclear issues, I consider that they do so as more of a secondary matter. This results in a total of 8 treaties, which are divided into 3 subcategories as shown here. The unit of analysis for my work is country year treaty, capturing if a country committed to a specific treaty on a given year when it could have done so. For example, my home country, Brazil, only acceded to the NPT in 1998, 30 years after it opened for signature, so the data set will have 29 observations for the years in which Brazil could have committed but didn't do so, and 1 observation for when it finally did commit, after which there are no more observations for this country treaty pairing. This results in a total of 3,251 observations, and I employed logistic regression models with interaction terms when needed for the analysis. So for the results, as expected, I found support for the first hypothesis, indicating that higher levels of support are associated with an increase, albeit small, in the probability of commitment. Moving from 0 to 100% support is associated with a 6% increase in the odds of commitment. Interestingly, treaty type, which was used here as a control, was not found to have significant effects. Nuclear reliance, however, was found to be associated with a 65.6% reduction in the odds of commitment. When introducing the interaction term, it becomes clear that the commitment by nuclear-reliant states is heavily conditional on the level of support. While at very low levels of support, the likelihood of commitment is basically zero, it increases sharply at higher levels, even surpassing that of highly supportive non-reliant states. However, and in line with the theory, the results show that different treaties are perceived differently, depending on states' reliance status. Reliant states prefer non-proliferation treaties, while non-reliant states are more likely to commit to disarmament and weaponry development restriction treaties. Despite challenges with data scarcity, which come up when introducing interaction terms, these results generally support my second hypothesis. Considering specific treaty features, the provision of rights, such as technology transfers, for example, can act as a mitigator for the costs taken when committing. The results again show the conditionality of commitment on support levels for reliant states, and again, despite data scarcity issues, the results show that overall the assignment of rights increases the odds of commitments for all states compared to non-assignment. More interestingly, when analyzing the level of obligation demanded by treaties in terms of entrance barriers, the results show that low levels of obligation incentivize commitment by less supportive nuclear-reliant states, but deters it for more supportive ones, which are the crossing lines that you see in the plot. And the opposite is true for high levels of obligation. It also indicates that non-reliant states generally prefer treaties with lower levels of obligation. This means that while a lower entrance barrier or less legally binding treaties might not be as attractive for very supportive reliant states, they might serve to get less supportive reliant states on board, and these are often the holdouts we seek to address. The results show that commitment to nuclear arms control treaties is a multi-step, strategic, and cost-sensitive act, highlighting that treaty design must be so too, especially when dealing with holdouts. I found that, in general, support tends to lead to commitment. However, this effect is conditional and affected by states' nuclear reliance and by treaty features. Specifically, I found that states are deterred by treaties demanding sunk costs, paid in full before commitment. They prefer to take costs paid ex post in installments after committing, or for treaties demanding costs in advance, they look for the possibility to offset these costs, whether directly or indirectly, over time. Providing rights or other incentives was also found to improve the odds of commitment. Crucially, the results showed that managing entrance barriers and the level of obligation demanded by a treaty might be a useful tool to deal with holdouts by strategically targeting more or less supportive states as needed. The study shows that the variables analyzed here help explain the empirical variation we observe in a systematic manner. Referring back to my initial question, it shows that every state can talk the talk. While every state can talk the talk, each treaty leads states down different roads when it comes to walking the walk. Thinking in terms of differential cost structures is a way to bridge rationalist and constructivist insights, contributing to our collective understanding of state behavior, and it could be applicable to a variety of cases. These insights could also prove useful for different actors. Other methods could be employed to look into the timing of commitment or developing the causal mechanisms. I'm particularly interested in conducting interviews or surveys with decision makers to evaluate, I'm nervous, to evaluate the practical relevance of the theory. As the coding of treaty features continues to improve, I would also like to test other variables to see if different patterns emerge. A differential cost structure framework could also be applied to other regimes. These insights could be relevant for policymakers interested in a cost-sensitive approach to treaty design, avoiding ex-ante sunk cost demands and preferring installment costs, or those paid off over time, could improve the chances of universalization. Additionally, this framework can help in finding tools to tailor hurdles and incentives when drafting or reviewing treaties to address holdouts. It also helps in thinking about commitment as starting before signature and extending beyond ratification, expanding the space for negotiation, which is especially crucial when processes seem deadlocked. In the geopolitical situation where changing states' preferences and getting them to join these treaties seems especially challenging, it is useful to consider that tweaking the treaties themselves could also be a way to bring us closer to the results we look for, a safer world where nuclear arms control is decided on collectively and not maneuvered by a small group of states or reckless individuals. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you, Arturo, and another one right on time. Thank you for really illustrating your extensive research in such a succinct manner, and I really appreciate also your comments about the application of this research in other areas. I mean, I think especially as we look at the erosion of norms outside of the nuclear realm, but looking at humanitarian arms control disarmament mechanisms, or looking at emerging technologies and the efforts towards new legal frameworks, you know, some of this research can also be quite interesting in those areas. So thank you so much. And last but not least, Trine. So Trine, we're going to go back from the macro level back to a slightly more narrow application, looking at also at disarmament success through the lens of the South African experience and Trina's research. So over to you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for the invitation and really inspiring presentations so far. As you can see in my title, well, actually not this one, but another title I'll have coming up here. Both Akata and I are working with concepts of imagination and reimagination, and I think that's quite interesting. I didn't know that actually before your presentation, but that's quite interesting to me, at least, that young researchers looking into disarmament and arms control are looking for reimagining things. So maybe that's just something we can talk through later. But in the next 10 minutes, I'll introduce you briefly to my newly started PhD project at the Danish Institute for International Studies. As Rebecca said, I'm Trine, currently at DIS in Copenhagen. And my project broadly looks into how we understand, practice, and imagine concepts of peace and security in what we are now starting to call a post-Western world, and what role disarmament diplomacy can play in shaping such a world. And this project is part of a larger, I would say, effort at my institute to try and understand what other security narratives we can revitalize at a time of deterrence-dominated security politics. So as I said, I'm in my very early stages of my PhD project. I just came home from preliminary fieldwork in South Africa, Johannesburg, Pretoria, and Cape Town. Very inspired by that, but also a little bit confused where to go from here. So I'm very much looking forward to your comments. The chapter that I'm working on right now for my monograph is what you can see up here, Arms for Peace, Rethinking Western Rearmament Through South Africa's Disarmament Diplomacy. But before I dive into this, and the clock is ticking, I just want to briefly introduce you to, or go back to where my interest in disarmament started. This beautiful building that most of you probably know. In 2019, I was sitting on the, I believe, 30th floor where UNODA is situated. Very excited to have my first professional internship at hand, and also trying to grapple with the understanding of what disarmament and arms control means for peace and security at that point. Now, 2019, as it turned out, was quite an interesting time to grapple with disarmament and arms control. At my time at UNODA, I watched Trump pull the US out of the INF Treaty, withdraw the American signature from the Arms Trade Treaty, and announce withdrawal from the Open Skies. So we can easily say that my baptism of fire into disarmament was quite intense. Now, while the answer that I posed previously, arms for peace, does more arms lead to peace, might seem embarrassingly obvious to everyone in this room, we are now living in what many experts that I have spoken to call a return to realism. So Europe is rearming. I can see even in Denmark, we are right now having a prime minister who are talking as if more peace and more technical expertise and military capability will lead to peace, and a return to deterrence discourse. So at the same time, and these are two of the contradicting, I had a picture of Trump withdrawing from the Arms Trade Treaty. At the same time, scholars such as Ole Vera from the Copenhagen University is also saying, and this is very crucial for my project, that at the same time as we're seeing this rearmament, we're also seeing a post-Western world shaping. And that means a world where the West can no longer take for granted its moral authority and institutional governance. Countries like South Africa are not just objects of international order, they're increasingly shaping also disarmament and arms control discussions and advancing claims that may not always resonate in Washington, London, or even in Brussels. So my PhD project, which is called Reimagining Peace and Security in a Post-Western World, tries to address exactly these two development trajectories. It does so mainly from a theoretical framework of critical security studies, very much the Copenhagen security schools of Ole Vera, Busan, Lene Hansen, and also peace research. So why South Africa? Well, South Africa offers quite an interesting example for me to analyze, precisely because of its, as has been mentioned here today, voluntary nuclear disarmament, but also coupled with a persistent advocacy for multilateral arms control in a fragmenting global world order. So emerging from the shadows of apartheid in 1994, South Africa and its president Nelson Mandela embraced disarmament and arms control as pathways to peace, not only for national reconstruction, but also for global peace. Within this climate, South Africa dismantled its nuclear weapons program and also emerged as what several of the experts I've spoken to call a norm entrepreneur on several occasions. What we are seeing now also importantly and across weapon categories, even though we're mostly talking about nuclear weapons here at this panel, we've also seen norm entrepreneurship on the TPNW, negotiations on the arms trade treaty, banning of landmines, etc. So across weapon categories in disarmament and arms control, South Africa is quite an interesting player to look at, despite, as many pointed out to me, that they have quite an active national arms industry. My argument is that they're still quite interesting to look at to re-envision and revitalize disarmament diplomacy. Even today, as Western states return to Cold War era logics of military buildup and deterrence, South Africa has continued to push for disarmament and non-military solutions to war and conflict on many areas, supporting the TPNW and advocating for diplomatic solutions, for example, to the war in Ukraine, and also recently with some of my fieldwork actively criticizing the rearmament that is happening across Europe at the moment. So some of my next steps is to understand what this means, especially for disarmament practitioners, because my theoretical framework is quite clear. I know what I want to contribute with, but for disarmament practitioners, I'm hoping this can be significant as well, because the field is facing some fundamental challenges. Disarmament, as I've seen it, has become increasingly characterized as almost unrealistic or obsolete in a contemporary security discourse, unfortunately. An expert a couple months ago said to me that disarmament is an artifact of the 1990s optimism rendered irrelevant by renewed great power competition. So it's quite clear that we need exactly renewed imagination for this field of diplomacy. So I'm arguing that quite a critical dynamic is unfolding, because as Western states are returning to a deterrence-based framework, we have countries that are trying to push for different ways of understanding peace and security even today. And also the next generation arms control agreements that we're looking into will be negotiated in a post-Western world, in a multipolar world, where Western ontological premises cannot be assumed. So understanding these alternative, if we can even call them that, security logics now is essential infrastructure for our effective practices tomorrow. Thank you.
Trina, so excellent. We've heard three very different perspectives, but I think a really good place to land, Trina, also to challenge us a little bit to think, as you said, a bit outside the box, to really look at also the role of countries in the global south, bridging countries in the multilateral space when it comes to the next phase of international arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation. So I hope this has given you lots of inspiration just for reactions and or questions for our panel. So the floor is open. And if you can please introduce yourself. I know there's a roving mic going around, so we'll wait for that to reach you, but just to say your name, affiliation, and if it's directed at a particular panelist, please do identify that as well.
Thank you. I'm Luca. I'm from the University of Trento in the Sant'Anna School of Advanced Studies in Pisa, in Italy, and I will be part of the next panel. So wait. My question is directly for Agatha. I love your presentation. It was really informative. And about the possibility of having a customary law. I don't think this will ever happen, honestly, because the 9 states that have nuclear weapons as for now are permanent objectors. But do you think that there would be a possibility of having regional customary law, for example, in demilitarized in nuclear-free zones in South America or alike?
Great. Should we see if there's one or two other questions? We can bundle a couple, otherwise we can let Agata react. But any immediate other reactions? Well, it's a very quiet crowd today. Yelena.
Thank you. Well, first of all, congratulations to all three speakers. Very interesting and inspiring presentations. My question is to Agatha and then maybe to both Artur and Trine. First, Agatha, you started the discussion in your presentation about the different, even kind of the opposite views on deterrence and disarmament within the European Union, some NATO states and some TPNW states. But I would add to that, and maybe you could also address it, that even within the NATO states, we now see a division, including some kind of sticking to the traditional role of nuclear weapons and the alliance, and others looking for both increased and expanded nuclear sharing or even development of their own deterrence. So I want you to address that. And for Arthur and for Trine, I really liked your reference to reimagining arms control. I think we do need to do a lot of reimagining of arms control nowadays. And with respect to both your kind of completely different approaches, in the current environment and where we literally don't have many options for even discussing these issues except for, say, the NPT review conferences, where do you see possibilities for even starting that discussion among the UN member states? And not just like, where would you place that discussion? Thanks.
Great question. So why don't we start with those two, and then we'll do another round, if that's okay, unless I see another next gen hand up. No next gen hands up. So we'll start with Agata, because we've got two quite specific questions, and then we'll go down the line. Okay.
Is it working? Yes, okay. Thank you very much for the questions. They are very, very interesting. About the regional customary law for the, about the ban on use of nuclear weapons, I believe we already experiencing this kind of, I would say, two legal orders at the same time, which is actually not probably the best for the international legal order in general. That on one hand, we have NPT, which actually is a very universal treaty that allows 5 particular states to possess nuclear weapons. And then we have exactly the regional frameworks. So we have the nuclear weapons free zones. We have now the NPT. And we already see this division in international law, kind of. And I believe this is not the best development for the international law in general, that we are getting these two different kind of legal orders, if I can call it this for now. And also what I see is that the dialogue between these orders, it's missing. For example, at the beginning we had some even NATO states attending TPNW state party meetings as observers, and now it's not the case anymore actually in the last state party meetings. And yeah, I believe this is a bit of a problem, and it's difficult to say how it will develop in the future. Maybe we'll need to wait for maybe another ICJ decision in the future on maybe another question. So let's see about this. About the NATO states, thank you very much for this comment. I believe it's also very important and it shows how complex this issue is, that we have the division within the EU, we have the division within NATO, that also some states want to participate in the nuclear sharing, like for example Poland expressed this wish a few times. For now it's not happening, and also NATO claims to calls itself the nuclear alliance anyway. So it's also a very divisive issue, and there is another issue that I didn't have time to mention in the presentation. This all discussion about EU nuclear deterrent, if EU should possess maybe its own nuclear weapons, which I believe it's not possible legally. But there is this discussion that shows how complex is this issue. So thank you for these comments. Thank you.
Right. Should we go to Trina next and then Artur? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. Where to place that? Well, first of all, if I take Denmark as an example, if we even had those rooms that could facilitate such discussions, I know my home country wouldn't actually have the political will to send anybody. So I think that's also a question to be asked. At the moment, we don't have a dedicated office, which we've had for many years in the Danish Foreign Affairs Ministry, for disarmament and arms control that was downgraded years ago. And there's no real, I've spoken to them a few times, there's no real wish to do that again. So I think there's also, from a national perspective, a real problem in revitalizing the relevance of disarmament. Again, make disarmament relevant again. It will make for horrible caps, but nonetheless, I think that's a major issue that we're facing right now. And as I can see, we're quite divided even in Scandinavia. The Swedish are showing up 10, 15 people to most of the meetings I go to. But in Denmark, we are extremely hesitant to do so. So I think we might see more bilateral meetings. We might see meetings that, well, now in Denmark, they're discussing security guarantees instead of disarmament and arms control, or even verification mechanisms. So I think we're going to see different forums pop up, but there's a lot of political will still to be found nationally for this to even be possible.
Yes, thank you very much for the questions, and I fully agree with Trine. I think maybe my exceedingly optimistic perspective is that maybe it needs to get worse before it gets better, and that's where we'll start finding some of this political will. And I think it also relates to states' ability to divide the issues and to understand that maybe if a very big discussion cannot be held at this moment because of great power rivalries, maybe tackling specific issues at different points and having specific processes for each of those issues could be a way to get around this. I think that, as we've seen in the past, it has often been in situations of crises that such agreements have come out of negotiations. And I think that now, for example, when nuclear tests are back on the agenda, as they haven't been for a while now, I think it might be in the interest even of the holdout states in the CTBT if they see a possibility that proliferation might be on the agenda again to try to work together to actually maybe eventually get the treaty to enter into force so that the verification regime can be fully in play, not only maybe even if it restricts themselves, maybe to make sure that no other players enter the arena. And eventually also with the discussions of the FMCT, maybe that could also be a way to sort of divide this issue into smaller, more manageable parts.
Trina had two fingers, and I also just two finger myself on that. I appreciate what you were saying, Arturo, about the historical fact that many breakthroughs in arms control disarmament have come at times of intense tension and crisis, including among the big military powers. I think that is a narrative that is missing in the current environment, and that's very, very important to reflect on. And as we look at lessons from the past in terms of how do we move through this moment of real crisis for the regime, and that's true at the multilateral level, but it's true at the regional level, it's true at the bilateral level. And again, I think there's many examples, including in the nuclear realm, that can be pointed to that effect. But Trina, your two fingers on the topic.
I got inspired by Arthur, and I just wanted to say I actually think that this idea of bridging between generations that we're doing right now is highly important to support that we do not need this to get so much worse before we start moving towards the relevance of disarmament. It doesn't have to be like that again, at least, which is also, I think, why someone like Akata and myself are sitting in our offices and trying to reimagine. We weren't born during Cold War tensions. We don't have the same historical background that much of the research we're reading into does have. So there's some bridging between generations to be done, I believe, for that relevance. Definitely.
Yes, and I think very much to Jenny's point this morning that we need to preserve the memory. So I do have a couple of hands, and again, I don't think okay. I have one next gen hand, so I'm going to start with that, and then I'll go to Jamie and Veronique. So please. And I think, let's see how we're doing on time. Okay, we're a little short. We have 5 minutes. So keep your comments, questions short so that we allow the panelists to reflect. Please.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, thank you for your presentations. I think they were really insightful. My name is Natalia. I am from Argentina, but I'm a master's student in University of Trento and Santa Ana School of Advanced Studies in Pisa. So considering specifically your presentations, Arthur and Trine, I think that you mentioned an important point about the next generation's arms control treaties. Considering recent resolutions, for example, from the United Nations on the group of scientific and technical experts for nuclear disarmament verification, considering we've mentioned before regional tensions and verification challenges, how do you think non-Western countries could contribute to these efforts, nuclear disarmament verification, thinking of a post-non-nuclear test world? Thank you very much.
Thanks for that. So we'll go to Jamie and then Veronique, and then we'll close, okay? So that's, and then we'll go in the order, Arthur, Trine, Agata. Please, Jamie, if the microphone can reach you in time.
First of all, thank you, Rebecca, and thank you to all the panelists. It's been a really interesting discussion. I had 3 points and really sort of inspired by your remarks, Trine. I think the idea of disarmament has been sort of utopian and idealist. Excuse me. I don't think that's necessarily new. I think in many ways disarmament has kind of long been dismissed as something for tree-hugging idealists. So there's a long history of that. second point I wanted to raise is, I take your point on the nuclear side. I think there are cases where you can make a credible argument that disarmament is working in other areas. Not perfectly, but in chem and bio-related issues, we have disarmament agreements. They are violated, I suspect, in several cases, but generally they do work. So I think there's something to draw from there. And then two ideas, I suppose, for you. I think it's become incumbent upon proponents of disarmament to make a better case as to why this is important. I'd actually say the same thing about arms control at the moment, because and we need to make that not in UNEs or jargon or academic scholarly language, but make a clear sort of evidence-based case as to why this is important, why it's been useful. And that's valuable, I think, for those in government that perhaps are trying to champion some of these initiatives or to help seed and share those ideas. And kind of, in many ways, feed into this idea of making arms control disarmament great again, I think the point you alluded to, and not waiting for a crisis to do that. And then another possible area is thinking through where did these measures come from in the past, because they often relied on a unilateral initiative. So I go back to bio, you had the Nixon renunciation of biological weapons in 1969. Over time, that evolves into the Biological Weapons Convention with lots of other factors, but there almost needs to be a unilateral initiative to kind of break some of the stagnation and the deadlocks. So what can we learn from the past that could inform those sorts of things in the future in a better time? Yeah, sorry, slightly rambling, Rebecca. But
all good. So as the mic wanders over, but I think good point also, I think this issue of educating is not just relevant to the public, it's also relevant to diplomats. I certainly hear this from, senior diplomats I interact with regularly saying, these issues haven't really featured in our training for at least the period of time that they've been doing their work. So I think it really is a question. So sorry, we had one final question over here. So, and then we will close, okay, so that each of our panelists can reflect a little bit on what's just been said. And maybe also all three of you in your final remarks, if you can leave us with a little hopeful message of what would be the one breakthrough that you're hoping for in the near term. Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciated your presentation. They were very inspiring. And I was... what do you think that reimagining disarmament and rethinking disarmament is already happening? For example, with the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and it's de facto a Global South treaty, and now there are 95 signatories, 74 states party. And it was also the first time that in the room there were affected communities from nuclear weapon and nuclear test. I mean, the negotiator, there were much more women in the room, and in general in disarmament, there are not as many women in the room, much younger people. So perhaps it in a way already reimagining and rethinking, even if it's challenge the big power and the traditional Western world. But I would say in a way it's a beacon of hope, this kind of treaty and what we call a humanitarian disarmament treaty. And I am glad that it's coming from the Global South, challenging all the assumptions from a more traditional Western view on disarmament and arms control.
So you've already left us with a bit of a hopeful message, which is great. But we'll let our panelists have the last word, and maybe we'll start with you, as I said, Arto, as the representative also here on the stage from the Global South and one of the champion countries of many of these instruments. So you start.
Yes, thank you very much for your questions. I'll address Natalia's one. I think one of the main advantages of countries like ours is specifically the point of non-alignment. And I think the fact that we can use that to try to talk to both sides and try to bridge the gap, especially in a moment where the great powers are so far apart. And I think this is a very crucial point. And in a way, now the Global South kind of holds the cards with like the norms entrepreneurship, and it kind of has it like behind itself. And I think on a more practical side, there's also a big desire in the Global South, I think, to develop both technical capacities as well as those geared toward development. And I think in a way, mobilizing those kinds of resources in the Global South in favor of the non-proliferation and disarmament regime could be crucial in terms of capacity building. And also speaking specifically of Brazil and Argentina, I think is a great case study on how countries that have very deep-held rivalries can overcome these things, negotiate, and find a way that that brings us closer to the kind of future that we want to see. And I think that's my hopeful message.
I'll address you all broadly and say I think there's definitely hope for, I love, James, that you're saying bring in specific historical events where there's been unilateral engagement and motivation, because that's definitely something that I'm not seeing at the moment. There's not many stepping up. So I think a reminder of those histories are really important. In the South African case, you also had Mandela as a beacon of hope that, as far as when I go to South Africa now, they're saying they're missing that. So there's also an aspect not only of temporality and relevance, but also of personality in disarmament and arms control that let's see who steps up next for sure. But there are definitely things happening, and happy to see the Global South engagement in the ban treaty as well. And I think some of the people I've spoken to argued that there was also a certain Global South angle to the arms trade treaty, and that at least there also the AU silencing in the guns. So I think also in conventional arms control, we could see that, moving into the next couple of years.
Yes, I agree with what my colleague said, and I think it's important to have the hope that we can move forward and change the narrative around nuclear deterrence and around our current threats and challenges. And I agree that TPNW is definitely very important part of a step in this discussion. And I believe that we need a lot of dialogue between all the countries involved. We need to, both sides need to understand their concerns and their current situations, the positions they are in. And I believe that if we start with this understanding, we can really move forward. And events like this or other conferences, when we have people from different countries, different backgrounds, working both in academia and practitioners, that this will help to move the conversation forward. Thank you.
Thank you all for your active participation. Thank you to our great panelists for sharing their analyses, for sharing their research with us, for sparking some great, I think, ideas and thinking for the next couple days. So please join me in a round of applause for them, and then I think we've earned our next break.
Hello? Okay, colleagues. We actually didn't have a break in between panels, so I think we're meant to go straight into the next session. So if you wouldn't mind finding your seats again so that we can get started with this panel. And then right after this, I think we've got one last session and then our lunch break. So if you need, if you need to leave the room, obviously do that quickly. But please come back for our panel on emerging technologies and arms control. And we've got three really excellent speakers here who are going to tackle three quite different presentations. So you're going to hear a wide range of perspectives on this topic. I'm, of course, Marion Messmer. I'm a senior research fellow in international security at Chatham House. I think most of all have met me before, but if we haven't met, then I look forward to chatting with you in the next coffee break. And it is my great pleasure to introduce our three speakers. We're going to start with Augustine Aschi, who is a lawyer based in Amsterdam and a former UNIDIA graduate professional. And Augustine is going to be speaking to us about regional perspectives on non-proliferation and disarmament, analyzing Africa-EU relations on small arms and light weapons. Then we're going to hear from Gabriel Beltran, who's a recent graduate of the Georgetown University Security Studies program, and he's going to be talking to us about safeguard challenges in the SMR era. Again, also very important new technology, slightly different approach to arms control. And then we are going to finish with Luca Rastelli, who's a current MA student at the University of Trento and the Santana School of Advanced Studies. And Luca is going to talk to us about his project on AI and nuclear stability, the challenges and new directions for arms control in the digital era. We're going to be following very standard panel format, so each of the speakers has 10 minutes. Then I will ask a follow-up question for each of them while you all can think of your questions, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. So take good notes and get your questions ready. Augustine, the floor is yours.
Okay, just to be sure this works. Perfect. Thank you very much, Marion. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. It is such a pleasure to be here, and I understand that I have a very limited time. I mean, we all have a very limited time. So I will delve right into my presentation. I am currently conducting a research on regional perspectives to non-proliferation and disarmament, specifically analyzing Africa-Europe relations on small arms and light weapons. But let's start with the basics, right? And just for a bit of context, I am currently undergoing a triple master's degree in summary, international law, international relations, and European law advanced. And a couple of months ago, I defended my first master's dissertation at the Institute Barcelona Estudis Internacional in Spain, where I evaluated the European Union's support for Africa's peace and security architecture through what is known as the Joint Africa-EU Strategy. Now, this research on analyzing Africa-EU relations on small arms and light weapons, I'd like to believe is an extension of that master's dissertation. But unlike my master's dissertation that was purely from an IR, an international relations perspective, this research is from a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary perspective because it combines both international law and international relations to address precisely small arms and light weapons. Now, for those of you that are not aware or familiar with the term small arms and light weapons, the United Nations Programme of Action, as well as the International Tracing Instrument that was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2005, has defined it to mean any man-portable lethal weapon that is designed, amongst other things, to expel or launch a shot, a bullet, or a projectile by the action of an explosive. Now, you can take a look at this document or those documents for details about this definition. However, these have been held to include things such as pistols, rifles, carbines, anti-aircrafted guns, grenade launchers, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, as well as the European Council, have at different times noted that every year, more than 500,000 people lose their lives to small arms and light weapons. And these include deaths that occur outside of the battlefields or outside of war zone areas, such as in our communities, on our streets, in schools, in churches, even in our homes. And due to the massive, large-scale, hideous atrocities that are caused by the impact of small arms and light weapons, they are now being referred to as weapons of mass destruction in slow motion. And I would like you guys to take a moment later on to reflect on this because I find this really, really interesting. However, going forward, it is fact and it is undisputed that Africa, by far and large, is the most affected continent when it comes to small arms and light weapons. As you can see from the statistics with regards to the death tolls, catastrophes, the investment into small arms and light weapons in the continent. However, Africa is not the only continent that is affected by small arms and light weapons. But you don't have to take my word for it. Europe, for instance, is one of those continents. As you can see from also the statistics in terms of, the international homicide rates in Europe, countries such as Brussels and even Scandinavian countries like Sweden as well are greatly affected from the impacts of small arms and light weapons, right? So at this juncture, since we have established that Africa and Europe are affected by small arms and light weapons, although disproportionately, the multi-million-dollar research question that I am currently interrogating, which I also pose to you, because I admit I do not know all the answers, is this. How do Africa-EU relations on small arms and light weapons reflect both cooperation and asymmetries within the broader disarmament and security governance? But before I proceed, I understand that this is a session on emerging technologies and arms control, and I truly acknowledge the fact that small arms and light weapons have become increasingly technologically advanced, especially when you take into considerations, innovations in manufacturing, in tracking, and even in the autonomy of these weapons, right? However, this research does not focus on the technological sophistications of small arms and light weapons. What it focuses on are the policy and legal instruments that are designed to govern arms control in this context, especially between Africa and the European Union, right? I thought that was interesting to just state out. But talking about regulatory frameworks, here are some of the regulatory frameworks that exist in Africa in relation to small arms and light weapons. As you can see, regional actors such as the ECOWAS Commission, for instance, SADC, and even third-party actors such as the United Nations have all taken actively participations with regards to small arms and light weapons in Africa. And with regard, this is right from 1998 all the way to 2021, but they're still relevant even up to date, right? We also have some of the regulatory frameworks in Europe. We can also see that within these frameworks, there are also other actors such as, African, Caribbean, and Pacific states that come into play all the way from 1978 down to 2025, where we also have active participations by different actors. But due to time, I obviously will not be able to address all of this, especially with regards to their effectiveness and participation. However, before I shut up, I would like to address this, the first one specifically, because I can see I'm almost out of time, with regards to the cooperation in frameworks and norms. Like I said, this is an ongoing research, so these are some of the conclusions I hope to reach. But with regards to the first one, I feel like this is quite revealing and evident, especially when you take into consideration joint initiatives and collaborations such as the Joint Africa-EU Strategy, the Africa-EU Partnership on Peace and Security with regards to disarmament and non-proliferation. And I think most recently, a week or two from now, we will see the convergence of the heads of states of the AU and the EU in Angola for the African Europe Summit, coming up, I think, on the 24th to 25th. But yeah, I think with all of these interconnected networks of, corporations, even with civil society organizations and NGO, this leads to one specific fact, in my opinion, and that is the fact that I believe that there is still hope, irrespective of the asymmetries that might be involved, right? That small arms and light weapons will be greatly mitigated in the future or completely eradicated. We hope so. But wouldn't that be such a beautiful thing on God's green earth? So at this juncture, I would really like to thank you so much for your undivided attention.
Thanks so much, Augustine. I'm sure we can get more into the details during the Q&A. And Gabriel, over to you next.
Not sure, guys. So, first of all, thank you very much for having us. I think it's so nice to see familiar faces. I am currently living in Washington, D.C. It's also very nice to see some other senior officers from the U.S. government, perhaps some retired. So thank you very much. So today I will be talking about safeguard challenges in the small modular reactors era. And this topic comes to me from the experience of working at the IAEA. I was working in technical cooperation. I was born in Colombia, so I was thinking very often, how come many of these technologies, very sophisticated, will they ever reach the global south, right? Will many interested countries ever have a nuclear program? And what will be the challenges that the global south might face on acquiring these technologies? So small modular reactors have been promoted as a revolutionary solution to global energy demands. there is going to be an increasement in consumption of energy. By 2050, of perhaps at the lowest predictions is be 40% of our current use of energy, and the highest projections have been of 2.5 times more energy that we are currently using. So this is largely driven by data center utilization for AI, but it's also driven by development, right, of countries, especially from the global south, right? So energy demand is already here, and one of the solutions that we've been looking into is small modular reactors, right? These technologies are, if they proliferate, they will also come with very new challenges that perhaps the non-proliferation regime wasn't prepared to address, right? So under the NTP, of course, we have the 3 pillars. We all know them by memory in this room, right? So countries do have the right to access nuclear energy, nuclear technology, right? But then what are going to be the constraints, right? Inequality and perhaps education, capacity building, and we can see this, a lot of this in the global south. So the increasing strain of the deployment of small modular reactors perhaps are going to, small modular reactors have the capacity to address some of these needs, but they're also going to bring these new challenges, right? Especially when we're talking about nuclear, the line between peaceful uses and potential military applications can become very blurry. So the treaty allows for enrichment of uranium, right, for civilian purposes, but of course it does not impose limits. And this is one issue that we all know in this room. This is for reference, a small modular reactor in a traditional nuclear power plant, right? Small modular reactors, their design emphasis in modularity, so allow them to be factory fabricated and shipped for quick assembly, right? There is currently more than 80 designs, and more than 18 countries are developing them around the world. Many of these are driven by private sector innovation, and this is also a new element that we have to consider. Per the IAEA, more than 40 countries have formally expressed interest in small modular reactors, many of them from the global south. So this is a global trend that is extending beyond the nuclear, the traditional nuclear states, right? And their appealing is very obvious, right? They are versatile, they are compact, they require a lower initial investment, and they are suitable for remote areas, right? However, this versatility also brings in new challenges, right? Complicates regulatory oversight and safeguards enforcement as well. So these are small modular reactors, as I just mentioned. There are so many designs, and because of their different designs, there are different technical challenges that this will bring for safeguards and proliferation, right? But since they are going, I will ask everybody to imagine that we're already there, and since they are going to be deployed around the world, right? Even in remote areas, it means just more nuclear material will be dispersed, right? It's going to be making inspection and oversight extremely more complicated. So many of these designs also contain sealed and transportable cores, and they also include long refueling cycles. Some of these designs are also containing high-assay, low-enriched uranium, and this is uranium enriched up to the 20%. So traditional nuclear power plants use enriched uranium up to 5%. So now we're jumping up to 20%, which is closer to 90%. So this is something that we do have to very closely look into, the type of fuel that we're going to use for these SMRs. And the reason is because they are smaller, so this uranium, and they are designed to last longer, so require less refueling. That's why we are using this fuel. So many potential Yeah, many hosts, of course, are looking into, many countries are looking into this, but many of them also lack of the robust regulatory capacity and safeguards culture for this. So this is some of the case studies that I actually have been looking into of perhaps SMR challenges, right? So currently Russia has one SMR developed. It's a floating SMR, right? It's already deployed in remote regions, so one can imagine how difficult it's going to be for this to be inspected, right? China also has been able to develop very rapidly SMRs, but there could be a lot of better work done in transparency on refueling cycles, on design, and even waste management. Emerging nuclear states like Ghana and Indonesia are also exploring the SMR options, but again, they do lack of the infrastructure for regulatory and safeguards. And finally, the United States, there is a lot of private sector investment in this. They operate outside of traditional state-led guard systems, right? And because it is private financed, of course, the main goal is just to get the SMR out there as soon as possible, right? So some of the SMR challenges for the IAEA that I have been observing, and there have been some research about, well, the IAEA already faces resource constraints, and then a world with hundreds of SMRs units will significantly multiply the monetary burden on them, right? So mobile reactors with advanced fuels and operating in remote locations are going to just complicate traditional methods of verification. Online and refueling seal cores, which are some of the technical characteristics of these SMRs, could also make inspections a little bit more complicated. So the IAEA must adapt to these new challenges. Some of the technological countermeasures that are out there for this, and as we all know, some of us have been saying in the presentations, for safeguards, very often there is the technology for verification and conducting safeguards, but a lot of this is the lack of political will, right? So some of the technological countermeasures that we have are the safeguards by design, and this means to include safeguards by design since the very early stages of the design of SMRs, and as obvious as it sounds for us, is not the case currently in the private sector industry. Also, the utilization of artificial intelligence to enhance anomaly detection and data fusion, and also early warning capabilities. Also, remote verification tools that could include drones and satellite sensors that can also provide real-time information about this. While these innovations complement, they do not replace the human and institutional elements of non-proliferation and safeguards inspection. So capacity building is certainly going to be a challenge. So what could be the role of the NPT in the SMR era? Well, there is going to be a need for verification and compliance systems capable of handling modular, mobile, and digital monitor reactors, right? The traditional inspection model perhaps will not suffice. This means another one will be integrating SMR safeguards. This is a little bit ambitious, but integrating SMR safeguards into Article 3. This could mean to require any state deploying or exporting SMRs to apply IAEA-approved safeguards by design standards. Another one could be the SMR export should be linked to NPT compliance. So only a state that fully complies with the safeguards can be received, also export these technologies. Some of the policy recommendations, as I already mentioned, safeguards by design for all exportable SMRs. Also, perhaps a little bit more ambitious than what I have said, would be to limit the enrichment for civilian use up to 20%. And perhaps some people in the room could explain us why there has never been a limit in enriched uranium. Another one would be to promote international fuel leasing models. So this is something that has been researched thoroughly. If we have international leasing fuel companies that perhaps provide fuel for nuclear power plants, especially for SMRs, there will be no need for countries to in-house have to enrich uranium. So this will absolutely mitigate proliferation challenges. And okay, just gonna jump for time's sake purposes. Some of the conclusion, and I don't want to just say that this is going to be only challenges. There is so much opportunities, right, for development. But we need adaptive safeguards, right, that do not, that also address the outpacing technology development that there is currently. And the future of non-proliferation will certainly depend on technological diligence and cooperative governance, but much of that is going to be political will. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Gabriel. I'm sure we'll also have more time to dig into your presentation in the Q&A. And Luca, the floor is yours now.
Well, thank you so much for the organizer for bringing about such insightful panels. My presentation is building basically on what we have been saying so far. So all the insights that we had in the previous panels were really interesting to me, so I will try to build on that. So as you see, my presentation will deal with AI and nuclear stability and the new challenges and directions that arms control should have in the digital era. So driving a little fast on the outline, I will explain you a little bit the state of the art as I did for now, and then we will deal with arms control limitation, especially non-proliferation. That will lead us to a gap, and that will be my research questions. And then I will try to sum up the discourse and try to get some conclusion and policy recommendation for further research. So going into the matter, AI, as we know, refers to systems capable of learning and recognizing patterns and even making decisions that are all attributes that were once given to human-only control. The new AI summer has been driven by a massive use of data and data processing, and it's been using in machine learning and deep learning networks that are changing the way we operationalize these frameworks. An important keyword in this concept is autonomy. So these systems are becoming more and more autonomous, meaning that they can act without human control or with just a limited supervision of humans, given their data sets that is becoming way and bigger. This brings about a lot of advantages, such as speed, agility, persistence, but as we know, AI is not a perfect science, so it has a lot of drawbacks. The first one is that AI remains brittle because it can fail when confronted with scenarios that are outside its data sets, so it's not really adaptive. The second one, it's opaque. So this brings us to the black box program. We don't know how it reasons, especially for deep learning. We don't know what are the patterns that it follows to get to a given output. And also, it is vulnerable. It's vulnerable from two sides. The first one is from data. So data can be poisoned or can be misread, and also it can banally be hacked. AI system can be hacked. So the central question, especially in the military domain, is how to ensure the use of AI to make nuclear systems safer, faster, and more reliable without eroding the very stability they are meant to protect. So to understand how this tension plays out, it is useful to analyze how AI has been used in the nuclear deterrence architecture. And I will do that by analyzing 3 of the four presented here. So going to the first area is the one of early warning, intelligence, and recognitions. So kind of the brain of the nuclear posture. Here, AI can process massive volumes of radar, as it was stated before, radar, infrared, satellite data, and identifying anomalies just in seconds rather than minutes or even more. So this means faster detection of launches, fewer mistakes, and supposedly better situational awareness. However, at the same time, the speed and autonomy brings a lot of issues. For example, this model can overfit, misclassify, or even hallucinate, and can, for example, target a natural event, and this was already shown as a nuclear attack. So it is not reliable in this regard. So because these systems, as I said, are black boxes, operator may not fully understand why a trigger alert is given. So in a tense crisis scenario, an unexplained signal could be enough to prompt a retaliation attack or a preemptive attack. So what we see, what begins as a tool for clarity could become a source of confusion and even destabilization. The second area is command and control and communication. The nervous system of deterrence. So here, AI can improve cybersecurity, detect intrusion in real time, and better help to efficient and resilient manage stockpiles or other issues. However, as these are generally advantages, so they enhance resilience and make human errors less prominent. However, once again, the risks mirror the benefits. So these systems are faster, and the faster and more automatic these become, the less time leaders have to verify the accuracy of the information they receive. So for example, if an AI defense network misinterprets a training data or is even manipulated by an adversary, an escalation could occur before anyone else realizes what actually has happened. So the time is being so compressed to the point that human control becomes just nominal rather than real, because basically there's no time left for human judgment. The third area, and the last one, will be precision, weapon delivery, and precision strikes. So AI increased accuracy, allows for adaptive targeting, and made platforms more resilient and resistant to attacks. Autonomous aerial or underwater vehicles, so the so-called UAVs and UUVs, can extend range and endurance, and smart navigation system can adapt their course, so they prompt reliability. However, they also can bring back a lot of issues. For example, in the case of unmanned underwater vehicles, they can undermine the very essence of deterrence. For example, these can be used to track nuclear submarines, and as we know, is the basic of deterrence on the nuclear triad. So the oceans can become transparent, so we know where everything is, so deterrence is, well, not there anymore. So what we see across the three sectors is the same pattern. So AI amplify efficiency, speed, and precision, but also uncertainty, opacity, and the risk for escalation. So the smarter and the faster the system become, the more fragile human judgment appears. Traditional armed control frameworks, especially in non-proliferation, were not built to manage this trade-off. So they were designed for tangible weapons. Banally, they were designed to counting weapons, warheads, delivery missile, or fissile material. AI, in this regard, as an enhancing technology, is none of them. So it is intangible, it is changing in nature every second, basically, because the path of technology is really fast, and it's dual use. This brings about another issue. AI is being developed by both governments and private sectors, and it has both a civilian and a military component. So that means that regulation is even more difficult to achieve. Another problem, especially in the military domain, is that we don't have a definition of what AI means in the military domain. More generally, there's a lot of debate on what AI actually is and what are its purpose. So in short, the architecture of armed control was made for hardwares and not softwares, and it is now out of step with technological change. This gap leads directly to my research question that I want to analyze which new governance paradigms are necessary and feasible to mitigate the risk posed by artificial intelligence. And by doing that, I will also dealing with something that was already stated in the last panel. The methodology that I want to use is a qualitative in nature. So I will analyze national strategy, doctrinal statement, military policies to understand where nuclear armed states, broad sense, converge or diverge into AI governance. Then this will be followed by a normative modeling to explore what soft law mechanisms are capable to achieve that. The choice of soft law mechanism is intentional, as we've been seeing also in the previous presentations, are better suited also to make no-reliant states comply with obligations. And of course, the time is not really ripe yet for hard law kind of treaties. The main limitation I will have to face is about the transparency of data. So I will, of course, focus on those data that can give me much more indication, so it will be biased towards those states. So the early findings show that there is a notable convergence amidst cautious. Across doctrine, there is a useful, a general agreement that AI should assist and not replace human judgment. Terms such as meaningful human control, crisis stability, or even system reliability have been used broadly. These shared values could form the basis for cooperative governance. So the hypothesis is that these underpin a soft law framework which will be suitable for managing AI and dynamic nature. Such a framework would be based on 3 pillars that still have to be researched in depth. So the first one is ensuring meaningful human control. So humans must retain the final decision over all decisions in the nuclear domain, with automation limited to analytical or logistical support. Second, defining red lines and risk thresholds. So for example, being on civilian administration of AI, systems whose malfunction could cause catastrophic escalation should be banned or tightly regulated at the national level. And third, reaffirming ethical and legal obligations. So existing norm of international humanitarian law, human rights law, and broadly international law should be explicitly extended to the governance of AI. This principle can be reinforced through transparency measures in expert dialogues and other forms of confidence-building initiatives in already existing forums, such as the UN General Assembly, First Committee, or other specialized ones, or by creating ad hoc ones. The broader insight is that arms control today cannot rely solely on counting weapons. This is not the case anymore, but has to govern behavior in stricto sense. To conclude, artificial intelligence is transforming nuclear governance, not by replacing humans, but by challenging and changing how they act and decide. So if managed responsibly, AI can enhance safety, transparency, and even verification, as was stated before, so strengthening strategic stability. But on the other hand, if it is not administered in the right way, so in a reckless way, it can risk turning speed into danger, and catastrophic result would be really much a possibility. Thank you.
Very much. 3 excellent presentations. With an eye on the time, I won't go into my questions for now. I'll reserve them should it turn out that no one in the audience has a question, which I can't imagine. But if you wanted to ask any questions, please raise your hands, and I'll come to you. Okay, we've got a question in the middle there. So let's start with you. I'll take 3 questions in the first round. And then
Thank you. Siri Jansson, Uppsala University, and I have a question for Luca. Fascinating presentation. My sense, not being an expert, is that the re-aim and the expert group within the CCV is sort of a conventional tone to it. And I mean, it makes sense that the nuclear weapon states do not want to turn this into a multilateral dialogue. I guess they want to keep it sort of behind closed doors. So I'm wondering about the parties, about a process like this, or arms control, in the sort of nuclear weapons AI nexus. What type of process are you envisioning, or could you maybe elaborate on that? Thank you.
Thanks, really important question. There were loads of hands up. Please raise them again. Okay, we've got one just there, 2 rows up on your right-hand side.
Thank you so much. Excellent presentations, everyone. I have a question for Gabriel. So I was wondering, when it comes to small modular reactors, where do we start to cross the line between civilian use and potential proliferation risk? You mentioned the enrichment percentage as one factor. Could you give more examples within SMR technologies or fuel cycles? For example, I was thinking about the fuel composition that raise similar concerns. Thank you.
Great question. And one last question. I think we had hands over on this side. Yeah, just there in the blue top.
So I had a question related to drawing the line on the last speech presentation regarding the accountability. Like, how do, when implementing AI in the military decisions, how we can ensure accountability, especially when it comes to military decisions that are obviously are related to life and death decisions.
Thank you. Three really excellent questions. I'll just add my question to Augustine because we haven't had an audience question so far, then we can hear back from all of our speakers. So your presentation focused a lot, of course, on the relationship between the EU and African states, but small arms and light weapons also has a lot of other stakeholders in it. So what kind of steps do you see need to be taken in order to make sure that it's a proper exchange between all the relevant stakeholders that are important for success? Great. We had two questions for Luca, one question for Gabriel, one question for Augustine. So why don't we start with Luca, and then Gabriel, and then Augustine?
Does it work? Okay, thank you for the questions. And those are things that I'm still thinking about. So I will not come to you with a clear-cut answer. About the parties and processes in the governance, multilateral, as you said, is not going to be possible. But as we said in the previous panel, historically, these processes has been started by one state advocating for these kind of measures. There have been statements made by the US, UK, and France, a white policy paper, if I'm not mistaken, about these issues. So it will be either bilaterally starting or even unilaterally. So the literature has proposed even a global moratorium on the use of AI in the military. How feasible that is, I'm not sure. But the sentiment is that given the importance of this technology, it should be addressed somehow. As you said, this has been already addressed in conventional weapons, like the CCW Convention on Autonomous Lethal Weapons has not reached nothing. So basically, so far, there is still a lot of discussion on the basic definition of what means autonomy, what means AI in the military domain. So it's a still growing endeavor. So I'm sorry I cannot come to you. What I think is that it will have to start bilaterally, mainly. I'm thinking about kind of frameworks such as those between US and Russia, because those are the main powers that are enabling right now the use of AI in many systems. Russia, if it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, launched this for a new model of submarine with Poseidon on uncrewed vehicles that are AI enabled and can carry both conventional and nuclear weapons. And the US is spending a lot on the use of AI in the military domain. So this could be one of the scenarios. The other one, and it's really important, is between those states that are close to each other. So for example, India and Pakistan, that would be really useful to have a kind of agreement between those two states because of the technology imbalance that there is. So if, for example, one of the two decides to implement those technologies, the other may be prone to develop them, but in a way that would not respect standards. So the risk for false positive or catastrophic escalation would be higher. So in general, bilateral would be the way to go for now, but then it may also get more traction globally and get to the multilateral level. But as we do not have even basic definitions. Nothing more than soft law between states, between few states may work. About the accountability, this is the core question of military AI. So basically, if I use an AI system that decides on the life or death of a civilian, or better not, but like a soldier, who's going to be responsible for that? There are multiple reasons, there are multiple shades in this. You have to take into account international humanitarian law, international criminal law, and the duties of the military in itself. So also military law should play a role. So that is why I'm also advocating for restating these commitments also in these soft law instruments, so that everyone knows what the implication of using AI in real life scenarios are. So still, there's nothing as for now, but the compliance with these regimes should be a starting point.
Thank you very much for your question. Yes, this is been one of the points for safeguard challenges on SMRs. Well, the line, traditional nuclear power plants require enriched uranium up to 5%, right? But SMRs, some SMR designs, the ones that require high assay low enriched uranium, this is going to be up to 20%. For military use, the weapons grade uranium enrichment is going to be 90%. So yeah, this is still a big jump from 20 to 90, but it is extremely, once you have the centrifuges, it is extremely easy to get there, right? So there is no limit. I mean, there is no legal limit on enriching uranium. That's why we have the case of Iran, who's enriching uranium up to those high points. So yeah, for small modular reactors, that's the case. Now there is new types of fuel. Some of these are gas fuels, and some of these are liquid fuels that are going to be used in SMRs. There is very little experience in how to conduct safeguards on these new types of fuels. These in developing countries. Now you imagine deploying these into Ghana or Colombia or anywhere else in the global south, right? The challenges are going to be even higher. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe your question was with regards to the steps that should be taken by other stakeholders. For me, I think currently there are already, certain steps that are being taken by different organizations, even the UN, like I mentioned during my presentation. Legal scholars, political scientists are already making great efforts, right? However, personally, I believe that when it comes to what's it called, small arms and light weapons, there's some sort of disservice that is being done with regards to its relevance, especially when you compare the attention that is given to, say, nuclear deterrence. For instance, I'll give you an example. During the course of this presentation and during the 3 sessions, we've had a lot of information about nuclear deterrence, but issues such as small arms and light weapons have taken the backseat. So I think it would be of great service for people to be aware and educated about the importance of small arms and light weapons, like we're doing right now, for instance. So I think that is something we can actually look into to get other stakeholders involved in addressing this critical. That's why I said we should take a moment to reflect on the fact that it is now being referred to as weapons of mass destruction in slow motion, because it really is causing a lot of havoc. So I think that's a step we can begin with, actually.
To all 3 of our speakers. We've got a question right in the first row, and I see several more hands, so we'll do 3 questions again.
From my side also, a big thank you for the informative presentations. As a former IAEA staff member, I would just like to allay some of your concerns. First of all, there was this program of reducing the enrichment of research reactors from highly enriched uranium to low enriched uranium, and there are a lot of research reactors that run on 20% or just below 20% enriched fuel. So the IAEA has ample experience in safeguarding that. Also, if the refueling takes place less frequently, it does not impede the IAEA from having safeguards measures and coming for so-called closed core inspections during the times that the core is not accessible. There's a whole division in the IAEA working on developing safeguards concepts for new types of reactors like SMRs. And also the IAEA has outreach to companies, and maybe the IAEA Director General will say something about it, where they are trying to involve all those companies and make them aware, not just of safeguards by design, but actually the 3S by design, safety, security, and safeguards, because it just makes much more sense to integrate all those measures into the design instead of retrofitting and running high costs after that. It was just my comment.
Thank you so much. Great comment. Yeah, you can just pass on the mic.
Okay, now it works. Thank you all so much for your super interesting presentations. My name is Chiara Fargnoli. I'm part of the Mentee program and also working at BASIC. I just have a quick follow-up question to the nuclear safeguards part regarding the SMRs for Gabriel. So besides looking for the fuel type, the waste management, this data that could tell us about a potential nuclear weaponization, are there any other external factors that maybe we should look into that could give us these signs? For example, I'm thinking of the amount of corruption in a specific country, or you mentioned that some of those are floating, so maybe the locations. Like, are there any other external factors besides the enrichment of uranium that we should be looking at just in case of, preventing such program from going from a civilian aspect to a nuclear one, weaponization?
And I think there was someone behind you. Yeah.
It's on. Okay. Hi, I'm Mariana. I'm from Portugal, currently based up in the north in Norway. And my question is more directly to Augustine. And it connects a bit the situation of emerging technologies with small arms and light weapons. Because, of course, emerging technologies have its pros, but also its challenges. And when it comes to small arms and light weapons, I think a lot about the issue of 3D printing, small arms and light weapons that can also lead to arms proliferation. And I feel like this is an important conversation to have at a multilateral level, and even in what you mentioned with the African-EU relations. Do you feel like this issue is being tackled in their policies and in their conversations, or do you feel that it's a bit overlooked?
I'll take one more question. We've got Laura just over there, so if you can just pass it across the aisle. Thanks.
Me again, this time not about safeguards. Augustine, fascinating. A couple of years ago at this conference, there was a terrific panel on small arms and light weapons. And I think so much more emphasis needs to be paid to that. And I'm troubled by the data that was presented about the role of the US arms industry in this dissemination of small arms and light weapons. Are there any conversations going on, well, maybe not recently, but in the recent past, about the control of the export of arms with the US?
Thank you. Lots of excellent questions. I'll just ask Luca one question so that we've got one question per speaker again. You mentioned using AI for verification potentially, but you also mentioned at the same time how various AI tools can hallucinate and are difficult to assess how they come to their decision making. So in your assessment, what is needed to trust AI for verification? Just an easy question for you to consider there. So this time we had two questions for Augustine, one question for Gabriel, and one question for Luca. So let's start with you this time.
Thank you very much for your questions. I think I would begin with yours. You made mention of the relation between small arms and light weapons and technology. I think with regards to my research, I believe that these policy and legal frameworks actually address small arms and light weapons. I mean, most of them take cognizance of how they are digitally enhanced and customized, but it also goes to the effectiveness and implementation of these treaties and instruments generally. And when you talk about effectiveness and implementation, personally, I would consider who determines what is effective and what is effectiveness, right? And with regards to who determines it, are we looking at it in this context from the perspective of the African Union or the European Union or, legal or political scientists, or citizens as well? And with regards to what is effectiveness, are we looking at it from the perspective of, short-term mitigation of small arms and light weapons, or we're looking at it from like a long-term perspective of completely eradicating small arms and light weapons? But it really depends on who you're asking. But since you're asking me, I would say it's a yes and no answer, right? Because yes, there have been certain instances where small arms and light weapon has been greatly addressed, even with regards to their technological sophistications as well, as you saw during my presentation. But there are still certain challenges that exist with regards to this. For instance, there is the issue of, historical institutionalism, neocolonialism from an African perspective, and even with regards to, the debate about the juxtaposition of right versus security. Is it your right to own these weapons to protect and defend yourself in most states like the United States, for instance? Or is it part of high politics within, government institutions to control how these weapons are being used, especially when you think of third actors like, insurgent or terrorist organizations. So it's kind of like a complicated, it really depends on who you ask, but for me it's a yes and no, because yeah, there've been good sides and there've been bad sides to it. And I really did not understand your question. I don't know if you mind, shedding more light on that. I heard you, but I wasn't absolutely listening.
Just an observation on the U.S. policy's engagement or lack of engagement in initiatives to control small arms and light weapons, particularly given the high incidence of U.S. contribution to the spread of these weapons.
Absolutely, you're totally correct, because although in my opinion, when I analyzed African-EU relations, there was a lot of engagement with the UN, with the US as well, because like I mentioned, this doesn't necessarily have to do with, issues in battlefields or, war zone areas. For instance, the US has what I would say no gun control policy, right? And I would also like to argue that they've been one of the greatest administrators when it comes to small arms and light weapons, so they control a lot of things that happens with this initiative. I really have not evaluated, the exports and import, of the United States contribution with regards to small arms and light weapons. But I would say there are a major stakeholders in, SAL, and for certain they have the power to control the narratives, right? So, but I really cannot answer your question because I totally do not know. But I can see from my own personal evaluation, they really have a high card on this one.
Hello. Thank you very much for the question. Oh, yes, the IA has plenty of research and the technology is already there, safeguards by design and by experience. Safeguards inspectors are some of the most passionate and professional, smart people I know. What I was referring more was on the amount of inspections that we were gonna have to carry and around the world in remote areas. Right, and the capacity building that this is going to imply. Not only capacity building in Europe and the US, but domestic capacity building for these governments to also develop the nuclear culture, the safeguard culture, and safety and security culture that requires, right? So this will be one of the challenges, the capacity building I will mention, and the other challenge was the safeguards by design as a requirement for licensing. It is not a requirement. It is highly encouraged, but private companies are not obliged to have these features. And some safeguards by design features are very highly technical, but some of them are also very simple. In your design, you drill a hole in XY area, and so you can put through there a cable, so there is a camera right there in the entrance. So they don't have to be extremely complex. They can be simply as include a camera here or there, include a window here, a seal window here or there. So, but yeah, these are not a requirement, and yeah, they are just highly encouraged. Yeah.
Okay. So about the verification, that's extremely interesting. I know the IEA has been doing workshop on the issue quite a lot in the past year. I'm not sure if they already implement that. But about the hallucination, I think that AI will be used mainly for data analysis and not actually seeing things because of the fact that it can hallucinate. So you can just be a tool to faster the process and manage the huge amount of data in an easier way. And this has its pros, because the more we train the AI, the better it is. So the more we train it with data. As for now, the data sets are not complete, so it hallucinates because its data are not there. So as I said before, if a thing is outside the training data set, nowadays deep learning technologies can infer from what they see and draw conclusions, but most large language models cannot. So I think as for now, the verification and the AI in verification will just be on the analyzing of data.
Thank you. And that also brings our panel to a close. Thank you to all three of our excellent speakers. If you didn't get to ask your question, please find them in a coffee break and talk to them further about their work. But for now, please join me in thanking all of our panelists. Oh yeah, we have concluding remarks. I didn't mean to say that the whole event was over, just our panel is over. So please stay in the room.
All right, we're now heading towards the conclusion, and we'll hear the concluding remarks by Michael Kalschmart, Chair of the Sub-Working Party on Conventional Arms Exports, CONARM, from the European Union External Action Service. So, up to you, Michael.
Hello, good afternoon. I have as much as 25 minutes booked for my closing remarks, but I will not use so much of your time. First, I don't want to stand for too long between you and the lunch, which is already waiting for you behind the central door. And second, the conference is just about to, the big conference is just about to start, and thanks to the consortium, we will have the opportunity to participate throughout the duration, so we are not saying goodbye in any respect. The main message I would like to pass is that the EU is so proud to have you here and to see the next generation project flourishing. And I would like to congratulate the consortium for bringing such a great community into this room. I had great time listening to you, and we are here at 2 connected events, and you are invited to the conference to learn and to get connected. But having heard you today, I'm also sure that the, I would say, present generation has much to learn from you in terms of fresh look at old issues. In terms of thinking out of the box, or perhaps rearranging bricks in the old box we all are using. From the audience, I have heard many questions as well. Some of them remained open, unresponded, but I take it as an evidence that the present generation and next generation are in fact on par with regard to knowledge and facing the same questions across the generations. And I believe that this conference, which is unique in connecting the present practitioners and the next generation, hopefully, of practitioners, is designed exactly to enrich participants by confronting old and fresh look at the same security challenges and the same legacy instruments. For example, Luca presented on AI in nuclear domain was a good example of awareness of the same issues. I'm just back from New York, where at United Nations General Assembly First Committee, just over a week ago, a resolution was passed on about AI and in nuclear command control and communication systems. And there was much split in vote. Not surprisingly, the Global South saw AI as mainly a challenge, while nuclear weapon states and states related to their nuclear umbrellas had more nuanced approach. Having said that, we have heard about possible post-Western arena of to negotiate new instruments, or about the weight of developing countries who want their voices to be heard globally and to be addressed in real terms. By the way, the resolution on AI in nuclear C3 was tabled by Mexico, so it's also a good approach of non-aligned countries to have their own voice and their own initiative. I would argue that these days Western world is actually listening to those voices much better than other global actors, especially after having heard that we need to mobilize Global South by technical assistance. I need to leave a statement in the records that it is happening as we speak. And the EU and the like-minded are global leaders in capacity building, in non-proliferation for third states, including the Global South. The EU only is maintaining and funding programs for more than 60 countries in CBRN, in arms trade, and I'm glad that Augustine touched upon it, for Africa and for dual-use export controls. So there is a solid technical platform which needs to be transformed into political cooperation for the benefit of nuclear, of non-proliferation and disarmament, which in my opinion is one of the biggest practical challenges for the years to come. But I think we can all agree that the single most important strategic question is for now, is how to reconcile the reality, which is rearmament, with the original goals of arms control and disarmament, and how to uphold the global and regional non-proliferation norms and try to move towards new goals within the present architecture, while different actors are shaking the architecture and or are at least trying to freeze all meaningful movement for now. I want to stop here. Thanks for being here and for such inspiring contribution. And let's meet at the big conference after lunch. And last words, I have a message from the organizers. The room needs to be emptied now. So please leave through the center doors just behind you and not through the lateral doors. And please take all your belongings with you so that we could rearrange the room for the big conference. Thank you so much.